If you want to watch exclusive Naruto Lemon, then you should go to my boosty, which is in the description under the video. What will happen if the quarrelsome girl, always going ahead, finally breaking free from everyone's hatred and contempt, returns to the very beginning? What will happen if this girl's best friend, sealed within her since birth, also returns with her? Chapters 31 to 34. Enjoy watching. Chapter 31, Gaara. Kakashi stood in the meeting hall, surrounded by other jonen of the Hidden Leaf Village, directly in front of the Hokage, who was seated at a semicircular table set on a low pedestal. His predecessor in this post, and now the representative of the elders of their village, sat a little to the side from him, slowly smoking his favorite kizaru, as usual. In general, Hokage, like everyone present here, knew the reason for this meeting: the Chunin exam taking place this year in their village. Or rather, the presentation of the teams of genin who will participate from the Hidden Leaf Village in the upcoming exam. Actually, the whole problem was that some of the teams, including his own, graduated from the academy only this year, and this exam was extremely harsh and often took away the health and even the lives of young and inexperienced genin. I have brought you here for one reason only. Minato's voice rang out loudly and sternly throughout the hall, attracting everyone's attention to him. I think you already guessed it. The man said a little quieter, but still sternly, looking around at his subordinates, especially focusing his piercing blue eyes on Kakashi. Once he was his student, and now this man was the teacher of his dear and beloved daughter. Those to whom, having stepped on his own pride, he entrusted the final decision on the participation of Naruto's team in the current Chunin exam. What happened in the Country of Waves clearly showed Minato that his daughter was no longer the same little girl whom he tried to protect from the whole world. According to Kakashi, Naru independently knocked out a couple of Chunin from the Hidden Mist Village who attacked them on the road. Also, during their first meeting with Zabuza, she, using a Fuinjutsu seal, created a rather skillful barrier, thanks to which the Nukenin could not harm their customer. This is not to mention the fact that his daughter, together with her best friend, managed to rescue their commander from the captivity of the Jounen's water dungeon and wound one of the 7 shinobi swordsmen of the mist, at one time nicknamed the Demon. And all this clearly indicated that Naruto was ready for the life of a shinobi, and no longer needed his total protection. But what Hokage said next finally convinced the man of the correctness of his decision. His baby used the cover of a tailed beast, and at the same time she was clearly conscious, doing everything with a clear mind. Because his daughter could only substitute herself for the Raikiri Kakashi in order to protect the Nukenin deceived by the customer if she was in her right mind, because the 9-tailed demon fox hated people too much to risk his vessel for them. And this meant that Naru was able to cope with the scarlet chakra of the strongest tailed beast, completely saturated with anger and hatred. Minato knew that at a certain moment his seal would weaken and something similar would happen. He knew, but he hoped that Naruto would then be at least 20 years old, because he thought that the child would simply be absorbed by this monstrous force. But his baby, despite everything, was able to cope with her burden. This meant that it was time for her to learn to control the power of her bijou, and Minato had to give his daughter the key to the tailed seal, the last thing that made Naruto his baby. It's just that over the past 6 months he could not decide to do this, because he was simply not able to do it yet. Therefore, the first step towards letting go of his daughter, the one for whom he himself lived, was to transfer her fate into the hands of Kakashi, as the commander of Team Number 7 and possibly her future husband. And oddly enough, Minato came to terms with this fact quite easily, accepting his student as his daughter's companion. Looks like the time has come, said Hokage, who still doesn't know what kind of pig his former sensei is going to plant on him. However, from his piercing gaze, so reminiscent of the look of his daughter copying a ninja, when she had another brilliant idea, the man immediately realized that his former sensei was up to something. And foreign shinobi have already appeared. Genmai Shiranui, standing next to Kakashi, grinned, a tall man with straight, face-framing, brown hair that reaches his shoulders, brown eyes, and with his constant samban in his mouth. His head was covered by a dark bandana with a Konoha protector sewn onto it, which, as usual, was worn backwards. and the man himself was dressed in the standard costume of a jonen of the Hidden Leaf Village. I saw them in the village. He chuckled, and rolling the needle held between his teeth from the right corner of his mouth to the left, added cheerfully, "So, when do we start?" "A week later," Minato said loudly, while Hiruzen silently nodded at his words. Surprised sighs and whispers were heard in the ranks of the jounin due to such a rush, which were interrupted by the Hokage's voice. "Okay, I'll make an official announcement," Minato drawled with a chuckle, solemnly rising to his feet. "In 7 days, on the first day of the 7th month, the Chunin exam will begin." Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura stood in the same place where they met their commander a few hours ago. Actually, Kakashi left, or rather disappeared, just a couple of seconds ago to report on the mission they had completed and attend the jonin meeting. Today's task, as the blonde had expected, turned out to be one of those that even first-year students at the Shinobi Academy could complete. Still, walking with several, albeit large dogs, was not so difficult. True, Nara's sundress did get a little dirty when one of the dogs jumped right on the girl. However, the paw print was hidden quite well by her pouch. "So maybe we can go. Shall we eat ramen together?" "I'm crying," the girl said good-naturedly, looking at her gloomy teammates. "Look at their faces," the tailed one drawled ironically in her head. "We'll bet on anything. They will refuse your generous offer." Kurama laughed with a half-roar, but was simply ignored by his Jinchuriki, who already knew that he was completely right. "Sorry Naru, not today, I need to train." As usual in the last 6 months, Sasuke chuckled, refusing, turning in the opposite direction from the girls, and slowly walked towards his house. "Hey Sasuke, come on, you and I," Sakura babbled embarrassedly, taking a few steps towards the retreating guy. The Uchiha stopped and turned around, frowning at the girl. "Let's practice together, shall we?" the pink-haired girl asked, blushing like a ripe tomato, once again, surprising everyone around her with her brilliant tackle. "Sakura, such Sakura!" The kunoichi snorted, watching from the side as her friend Haruno answered with a heavy sigh. "If you have time to pester me, you better learn a couple of new jutsu." Sasuke chuckled in a completely Uchiha-like manner, somehow reminding Naruto of his father at that moment. Wow! How beautifully he beat her off this time. The tailed trickster said approvingly at this whole picture, forcing his Jinchuriki to once again hold back the laugh that rolled up into his throat, caused solely by his comment from the prompter booth, because the situation itself was extremely unpleasant. "To be honest, you are many times weaker than Naru and me." Having almost openly told the girl that she was something like ballast in their team, the guy left. Sakura, well aware that this was the truth, sniffled sadly. And Naruto felt sorry for her, because in the past the only gifted one on their team was Sasuke, and Haruno was not alone in her weakness. Now the girl was clearly the weakest and most useless, and this, most likely, put pressure on her with redoubled force. However, Nara knew that over time this would definitely change and she would become the strongest among them, at least physically. "Sakura, don't give a damn about this workaholic, come and train with me?" the kunoichi shouted to the chuckle of her inner demon, who still didn't like the girl who endlessly tormented his Jinchuriki at the academy. It's just that the pink-haired girl didn't even seem to notice this cry from the blonde, continuing to stare either into emptiness or at the back of the departing Sasuke. "Turn around." Meanwhile, Kurama laughed fervently, sensing the chakra of one old rival of his Jinchuriki. The girl, still worried about Sakura's condition, turned around without thinking and immediately choked on her own laughter, a lump stuck in her throat. Directly behind her stood an extremely strange rectangular box, crookedly disguised as a large stone with 2 round slits for eyes on one of its walls. The blonde laughed silently and slowly walked a couple of meters forward, the box stone following her. When the girl stopped, a loud bang was heard behind her due to a box sharply slamming onto the ground. "God, they're geniuses at camouflage," Kurama said ironically through the hysterical laughter that shook Naruto's inner world. "What do they teach them at this Shinobi Academy of yours?" he added sarcastically, after the disguise of the young leaf shinobi crashed onto the ground. "Come on, they are still children," The kunoichi reproachfully drawled. However, she herself controlled herself with all her strength. Hey, I was only pretending not to notice you. Unable to bear it, the blonde shouted with laughter, and turning around, pointed to the box standing in front of her. Where have you seen a stone of the correct shape, and even with 2 holes? The girl asked mockingly, as the box slowly rose, and 3 children appeared from under it. I saw 3 right away, she said proudly, masterfully playing the role of the winner. Bravo, Naruto, you are truly a heroine! Kurama chuckled ironically, continuing to chuckle at the next performance of the theater of the absurd. I didn't expect anything less from my eternal rival. With dignity, as if he really thinks so, although this is probably what actually happened, said Konohamaru, who was standing behind 2 other children, whom the kunoichi had already managed to recognize just as well. A boy named Dudan Ise and a cute girl, Moegi Kazumatsuri. Ise, unlike his best friend and leader, was a calm and easygoing child. He had short brown hair and intense dark eyes hidden behind thin round glasses. He was dressed, as always, in a simple blue shirt with a button-up in the middle and regular brown trousers. And a long snot flowed from the boy's nose, without which Naruto had never seen him before. Moegi, on the other hand, was an optimistic, confident and very energetic girl, who, due to her long association with someone like Konohamaru, became extremely restless. Outwardly, the girl was quite cute with her bright orange hair, tied into 2 fancy ponytails and an eternal blush. She was wearing a pink t-shirt with a red sleeveless vest over it, gray pants and the most common ninja sandals. Ah, it's you, Konohamaru, the blonde said without much enthusiasm, knowing full well that she was pissing off the boy with her behavior. In her head, she immediately heard the disgusting giggle of Kurama, who, from the indignant expression on Konohamaru's face, saw perfectly well that the second act of the performance was just around the corner. What kind of a is that? Pointing his finger at the kunoichi, justifying all the hopes of the Nine Tails, the boy literally exploded. Hey! You have become so unfriendly! He shouted offendedly, while Nera could barely keep a mask of equanimity on her face. Starstruck! Kurama stated in the tone of an all-knowing person in the blonde's head, causing her to nervously cough, hiding the laughter that burst out. Well, what do you want? The girl cleared her throat, looking down at the children. Konohamaru chuckled offendedly and began to whisper something in Isa's ear, and Moegi, boldly taking a step towards the girl, smiled affably at her, completely ignoring her tone. Well, the girl said slightly hesitantly, looking now more cute than ever. Commander, are you busy right now? She asked, looking at her with pleading eyes. And this girl has a great future. Unexpectedly for a kunoichi, the Nine Tails blurted out thoughtfully. Even I was a little affected, he drawled, looking at the awkward girl through the eyes of his Jinchuriki. You've just become a little kinder, Kurama. The blonde responded with a chuckle, actually being in a little shock after her friend's words. No. She already said out loud, I'd practice. The kunoichi said, looking at the instantly gloomy children. You really can't wait. Meanwhile, the fox muttered in response to the phrase of his only friend, and then added caustically, slightly offendedly. And you have become simply a master at trolling people. What? The children shouted in unison. But you promised to play ninja with us. They drawled, reminding the girl that she really promised to play with them a couple of days ago. However, now it was not so important, because they would hardly be able to play today, since after the meeting with the genin of the Sand Village, Nero had her own grand plans. Why do ninjas play ninjas? Snorted Sakura, angry at the whole world, which the blonde had already forgotten about. Haruno frowned at her and her little friends, as if she was trying to understand how a person playing ninja with children could be so stronger than her, the best student of their stream. Why does she even care? The kunoichi asked herself while exhaling, and smiling sweetly at her teammate, she said something that at least slightly reflected her true thoughts. Why not? She just wants to take her anger out on you. Remember how many times we got it just because we were close? The tailed one interjected with an ironic remark into the thoughts of his Jinchuriki, answering her rhetorical question. Hey, who is this? Konohamaru asked, causing the blonde to turn her attention to him and his squad. Icy shyly hid behind Naruto's legs, and Moegi looked over the guy's shoulder, as if the pink-haired girl could bite them. This is my teammate Sakura Haruno, Naru answered proudly, pointing towards the still gloomy and angry girl with long pink hair. The children looked at her from head to toe in a strange way, seemingly trying to determine by what kind of person this girl was. But when she tried to punch their commander in a big way because she tried to put her hand on her shoulder, the children's looks became extremely suspicious. The blonde smoothly dodged the blow, jumping to the side, because she was wearing a dress and was not going to answer her friend. Commander! The children screamed in unison again, rushing closer to the kunoichi. How dare you! Konohamaru shouted menacingly, piercing Sakura with his gaze. Oh, you ugly, ugly, ugly! The children screamed in unison again as all three of them were next to Naruto. Q.E.D. The Ninetales snorted without his usual antics, as if what had just happened had pissed him off. However, this was quite possible, because Kurama in the last few years has somehow been too jealous of those who insulted his vessel. But your defenders are beyond praise, the tailed trickster said in his normal voice, as if there were no previous words, with a bit of sarcasm, as if he was mocking everyone around him. Sakura seemed to get even angrier, this time intending to hit Konohamaru, who was screaming louder than the others. Naruto looked strangely at the boy, who was not noticing the hurricane approaching him in the form of a pink-haired kunoichi, trying to decide for herself to stand up for him or not. Haruno, meanwhile, slowly and menacingly approached the grandson of the third Hokage, not even knowing who he was. Oh, let him have it once, to talk like that with those who are stronger. And even with girls. The Ninetales laughed, partly expressing the thoughts of the kunoichi herself. No, she really was pleased that the boy stood up for her, but he clearly shouldn't have said that. Therefore, when Sakura overtook Konohamaru and gave him a rather impressive and tasty slap on the head, she only closed her eyes dejectedly. Haruno, taking revenge for the rudeness in her direction, snorted contemptuously, turned around and walked towards her house. Konohamaru, are you okay? Udan asked quietly, approaching his friend who was lying on his back, whose impressive bruise was already beginning to darken. Icy and Moegi carefully helped him get up and brush off the dust. Crap, the guy cursed, coming to his senses, he muttered offendedly, rubbing the already black bruise. Yes, this is actually a man in disguise, he said a little louder, glancing sideways at the retreating girl. But Sakura, who had already moved a considerable distance, still heard these words. She, with a belligerent look, turned towards them and rushed towards the taken-aback Naruto and three frightened children. Run! The kunoichi Kurama laughed in her inner world, and in her head it was as if a switch had switched. The girl, grabbing the hands of Moegi and Icy, suddenly began to run away from the enraged Sakura. A reflex developed in her past life. Konohamaru, because of whom they got into such trouble, was ahead of everyone, because he started first. By the way, Naru, does this picture remind you of anything? The Ninetales grinned, finally remembering in detail how they crossed paths with the jonen from Hidden Sand Village in a past life. So first, let's listen to the mentors of the new jonen, said Minato, after which the three jonen came forward, standing in a row in front of the Hokage. Kakashi, Kurenai and Asuma. He named one by one the names of the commanders whose teams graduated this year. Well? Are there any genin you would like to recommend for the Chunin exam? The man asked sternly, without taking his eyes off the jounins. I think you already know, but... After a genin has properly completed the 8 tasks and received a recommendation from his mentor, he can take part in the Chunin exam, said the Hokage, quietly signaling to Hatake that it was up to him to decide whether to allow Naru to participate. Of course, by the time the exam starts, the genin perform a lot more tasks. So it's up to their sensei to decide if they're ready. Smiling softly at everyone, he added, and looking at his former student said loudly, Kakashi, let's start with you, Team 7, Commander Kakashi. Uchiha Sasuke, Namake's Naruto, Haruno Sakura. The man said clearly, looking into the impartial face of Minato, who presented him with one of the most difficult choices. However, Hotake already knew what his answer would be, since he saw too well the potential of all members of his team. Yes, he understood that this was extremely dangerous, but limiting them only because of this fact was simply stupid. And Naru would never forgive him for this. In the name of Hotake Kakashi, I nominate them to participate in the exam, he said. Minato, closing his eyes, only nodded, realizing that he himself would have chosen this option. Team 8, Commander Kurenai, Hyuga Hinata, Inuzuka Kiba and Aburame Shino. Ignoring the behavior of the Hokage, because she knew well the reason for this, the only woman standing in the front row continued to speak behind the copying ninja. In the name of Yuha Kurenai, I join. Team 10, Commander Asuma, Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara and Akimichi Chuji. The third jonen responded just as clearly, in the name of Asuma Sarutobi, I join. All three. Hiruzen, sitting a little to the side, grinned, raising his voice for the first time during today's meeting. How unusual. Taking a drag, he said, giving his successor as Hokage time to collect his thoughts. Wait a minute! Still, unable to bear it, Yumino, standing behind everyone, shouted, sincerely believing that these 9 genin should not participate in the upcoming exam. What's the matter, Irika? Minato asked tiredly, nodding briefly in gratitude to Hiruzen. Hokage! Let me tell you! Stepping forward a little, the man blurted out impatiently, looking at the 3 jonen with disapproval. Maybe I'm minding my own business, but they were all my students at the academy, he spoke, turning to Minato, who was looking at him with a strange face. Yes, they are all very talented, but it's too early for them to pass this exam. They need to gain experience. Irika drawled, taking another step forward, and again looking at the 3 commanders, added, I don't understand what the jonens are thinking about. I became a chunin when I was 6 years younger than Naruto, Kakashi said dryly, looking sternly at Yumino. Naruto, not you. Irika abruptly interrupted, clearly about to say something else to Hotake. Do you want to kill them all there? Raising his eyebrow eloquently, he asked the jonen, this is an exam. They are always dissatisfied with their assignments. A couple of wounds will only do them good. Kakashi waved away his words, just like him earlier, interrupting the man's monologue. Ditch? And this is not a bad idea. The copy nin grinned, causing pure shock to appear in Yumino's eyes. What? He asked fearfully, as if for the first time in his life he had seen the man who said these words. Just kidding, of course, Irika-sensei. Without any hint of a smile, Hotake replied, still looking coldly at his opponent. I understand your feelings perfectly. Maybe you don't like it. But, no need, Kakashi. Kurenai said quietly, knowing the genius of her class too well, looking worriedly at their argument, the Hokage's face darkening every minute and the third's worried look. It's none of your business. Ignoring Yuha's words, the man continued to speak. They are no longer your students, they are now my subordinates. Under Asuma's heavy sigh, Kakashi said dryly, knowing full well that he would have nothing to answer to this. Yes, it was cruel and ugly, but this dispute was over, Hokage, at least you. Naruto is your daughter, Yumino said barely audibly, finally looking at the head of the village, and it would be better if he didn't do this, since Minato at that moment was clearly damn angry. Yes, Naru is my daughter, but also she's a shinobi. The blonde coldly snapped, coming out from behind his desk, uttering the words with which he had recently convinced himself. Don't forget, thanks to whom Kakashi, at one time, became a chunin at the age of 7. He said in such a tone that everyone in the hall flinched, because they all knew that the last surviving student of Minato was like a son to him. And if he decided that Naruto and Sasuke are ready for the exam, I trust him completely. The Hokage spat dryly, and nodding to the others, disappeared from the meeting hall using the Thunder God technique. Naruto, as she ran, tried to figure out how she could avoid what happened in the past, during their first meeting with the genin from the Sand Village. Before that, trying to remember the details of her acquaintance with the Kazekage family, the blonde only remembered that Sasuke and Sakura and Konohamaru and his team were there. Neither she nor Kurama could remember the exact moments. And only now, after the words of her tailed comrade, the kunoichi finally remembered how exactly this meeting took place in her past life. Konohamaru ran into Kankuro as he ran, and he, without hesitation, tried to strangle him. Naruto only now realized what exactly they managed to avoid thanks to Sasuke and Gaara, because if the Kazekage's children had killed the Hokage's grandson, it would hardly have ended well. "Here comes the puppeteer," the Ninetales said, escalating the situation even more. But he said it too late, because after a few seconds the kunoichi suddenly froze in place, hearing the sound of a dull blow ahead and a loud "Oh" from Konohamaru. "Hey, that hurts," Kankuro said with a frown on his face, appearing before Naruto exactly as she remembered him. Black, baggy overalls with a drawn circle divided into yellow and purple halves, a hat with cat ears, with a metal plate with the symbol of Suna sewn on it, and black gloves. The guy had his war paint applied to his face, which, as she later learned, depended on the number of puppets he was controlling at the moment. And themselves, puppets wrapped in bandages, hanging behind his back. His sister, Temari, Shiki's future girlfriend and her friend, standing with the same gloomy face as her brother, looked slightly different. A simple white dress just above the knee, her favorite large fan attached to the girl's back with a wide red belt, and a shinobi protector around her neck. Temari had nets on her left thigh and right knee. The only thing that remains the same this is sandy hair tied in 4 buns and large, clear eyes. "It hurts, I understand, you brat," Kankuro repeated even more rudely, lifting Konohamaru by the chest and shaking him slightly. "Well, what are we going to do?" the Ninetales ironically asked in a tone as if he was asking his Jinchuriki about the weather. "Hey, stop it, we'll get screwed later," Temari drawled, not wanting to interfere in the turmoil in someone else's village. Moreover, they had their own motives not to attract special attention to themselves. "Don't you remember I took those seals with me today?" The girl grinned to herself, in the outside world, silently listening to their conversation. "Sorry, it's all my fault," Sakura said quietly, trying to smooth over the conflict, and stepped forward a little, holding her hands in a conciliatory gesture. "But of course!" The Ninetales laughed in the same tone as the blonde, having caught and appreciated the flight of the blonde's thoughts. "Hey you, let him go!" Unexpectedly for everyone, Naruto shouted loudly, attracting the attention of Kankuro and Temari to her. "Let's play a little before the bosses come," the guy said with a grin, ignoring the words of everyone except his older sister, and squeezed his hand harder, gradually cutting off Konohamaru's access to oxygen. "Oh you!" the girl shouted belligerently, most likely looking extremely comical in her sundress, which Kankuro demonstrated with his facial expression. But contrary to his impression, the kunoichi rushed in his direction, taking out a pair of kunai and a sheet of seal from her pouch as she walked. The guy, with a nasty grin, moved the fingers of his free hand, controlling the threads of chakra, invisible to an ignorant person. It's just that Naruto, thanks to the frequent training of his undermode sage, perfectly saw all its threads, without much difficulty avoiding all obstacles. At the same time, the girl managed to throw her unusually shaped kunai, one at Kankuro's feet, the second towards the branch where Gaara was supposed to appear. The puppet master, finally understanding what was going on, wanted to increase the number of threads, setting up something like a trap, but he didn't have time. The blonde disappeared from his field of vision, appearing 1/100th of a second later, right in front of the guy's nose. And then, with a quick and smooth movement of her hand, she attached a small seal directly to his forehead. "Let Konohamaru go, you weakling," Naruto said mockingly, noticing the complete confusion on Temari's face out of the corner of her eyes. "Otherwise, Kibaka Fuda on your forehead will smash your whole face." She grinned, seeing Kankuro's confident face turn frightened, and then, quietly, frighteningly, she added, "And don't even try to remove it yourself. In this case, this seal will also be activated." "He's about to shit his pants." Kunoichi Kurama laughed in his head, appreciating the puppeteer's distorted face, after the words of, at first glance, a completely ordinary weak girl. "If you don't remove the seal," the guy spat out nervously, raising his hand to strike. But distracted by the blonde, He did not notice a stone flying at him, launched by Sasuke, sitting on a branch of a tree growing nearby. He hit the hand holding Konohamaru with force and forced Kankuro to let go of the child. "What do you need from my friend?" the Uchiha asked gloomily, sitting imposingly on a branch. "And here is our prince on the great poplar!" Already openly mocking what was happening, the Nine-Tails squeezed out through hysterical laughter. He, like his Jinchuriki, felt the approach of the one-tailed chakra, and therefore the denouement of the ongoing performance, for most of all these two were afraid of their brother. "Sasuke, show them!" Sakura squealed nearby, diverting all attention to herself while Icy and Moegi dragged Konohamaru a little further from the aggressive strangers. "Oh, another one came out," Kankuro snorted, clenching his shaking hand, which was hit by the stone. "Get out!" Evil the Uchiha chuckled, not really delving into the guy's words, his eyes searching for Naruto, who had suddenly disappeared from his field of vision. "Hey, you brat, get off!" Taking his puppet off his shoulder, Kankuro shouted, starting to slowly remove the bandages from it. "I can't stand such show-offs," he drawled, piercing his gaze at the arrogant brunette sitting on a branch. "Do you want to use Karasa?" Temari asked a little nervously, remembering well what their commander had told them this morning. "Maybe you can stop your friends already?" Neru's cheerful laugh from the branch next to Sasuke scattered throughout the street. "Otherwise, this is the one pointing his finger at Kankuro. Handsome guy, he'll lose his face." Looking down to where Gaara stood upside down with an independent look, the blonde said cheerfully, once again shocking everyone with her trick. "This is only the best case scenario," Kurama added mockingly in the kunoichi's head. "At worst, he will be left without a head." He laughed bloodthirstily, while Neru regretted that no one but her heard his words. "Kankuro, stop it, you're disgracing our village," the guy standing on the branch, right under the kunoichi, said emotionlessly, while somehow strangely glancing at her with his empty turquoise eyes. "Jie." Gaara, the puppeteer, mumbled in fear, hastily putting his puppet back in place. "You're too busy fighting what a disgrace," said the one-tailed Jinchuriki, glaring at his older brother. "We didn't come to the village of Lys for this." The guy snorted in such a tone that it immediately became clear to everyone what he thought about his mental abilities. "Listen, Gaara, they started it." Kankuro stammered and tried to justify himself, but was interrupted by the harsh voice of his younger brother. "Shut up, or I'll kill you," he said quietly, but extremely frighteningly, casting an unreadable glance at the puppeteer. "I apologize for their behavior," Gaara said more peacefully, glancing briefly at Sasuke and slightly longer than necessary, holding him on Naruto, for some reason attracting all his attention. "Okay, I'm sorry," Kankuro responded quietly without raising his gaze from the ground. "I'm very sorry too," Temari echoed him, also lowering her eyes. "It's immediately obvious which of you is more well-mannered. Children of the Kazekage." Smiling at this whole picture, Naruto blurted out, and carefully, holding the skirt of her sundress, she jumped from the branch, having previously taken her kunai with her. "I adore you, Naru!" Kurama told her, bursting into laughter again, enjoying the crazy, and there's no other way to say it, the faces of all those present. Even Gaara was slightly surprised by her words and the blonde's appearance, which was absolutely inappropriate for them. "I know, fox face!" The kunoichi grinned, straightening her gathered sundress and disheveled hair. Then, she raised her head up and, smiling broadly at her fellow sufferer, literally sang, "I, Naruto Namake's daughter of the Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village, for friends just Naru. Sabaka no Gaara." The guy answered, and disappeared in a whirlwind of sand to appear right next to the blonde, continued, "The youngest son of the Kazekage of Hidden Sand Village." The girl smiled at him even wider, looking and recognizing him as her good old friend. Still very young, with his tousled dark red short hair, pale skin, large turquoise eyes with deep bruises from lack of sleep, and kanji on left side forehead, he was dressed v black t-shirt with mesh sleeve length v 3/4, free trousers togo same colors with wrapped around bandages ankles and sandals shinobi. Through his a wide leather belt for Naruto's already familiar gourd was thrown over his right shoulder, to which the Sand Village protector was attached. Gaara was so dear to Nera's heart, the first who could understand her pain and loneliness. In a sense, he himself saved her during their battle. But at the same time, he seemed so distant to her, an empty look, anger and hatred on the face, and indifference to the whole world. They had gone through too much together, but only the girl knew about it. Gaara was now only interested in her as a possible strong opponent and the daughter of the Hokage. This caused simply unimaginable pain in the heart, singing because of their long-awaited meeting for the girl. "Come on, pull yourself together, Rag, now we'll patch him up a little and you'll become friends again." The Nine-Tails sincerely grinned in her head, encouraging his Jinchuriki, and then ironically added, "And in general, stop cheating on your beloved sensei with everyone. I'm not changing anything." The girl grinned gratefully, noticeably perked up by the words of her tailed beast. "Very nice, Gaara," said the kunoichi, and impulsively hugged the guy tightly, quietly giving him her unusual Uzumaki chakra. This was supposed to calm his nervous bijou a little, allowing Gaara to relax at least a little, and, at the same time, allow her and Kurama to talk to Shikaku a little later. Meanwhile, the entire street was plunged into oppressive, tense silence. And if Sasuke, Sakura, and Konohamaru and his team were simply surprised by Naruto's strange behavior, Temari and Kankuro were, to put it mildly, frightened by the stranger's actions, expecting another outburst of anger from Gaara. But contrary to the expectations of his brother and sister, the one-tailed Jinchuriki blinked in surprise and exhaled somehow relaxed, hugging Nera just as tightly in return. "I'm very pleased too, Naruto," he answered peacefully, smiling for the first time in the memory of his relatives, once again that day striking them with his strange, friendly behavior. "I once again apologize for the behavior of my brother and sister," Soft Gaara said, contrary to his words, with a stern gesture indicating to his teammates that they were leaving. "See you? Bye-bye, Gaara," the blonde smiled at him, deftly removing her seal from the surprised Kankuro passing by. "And you can just call me Nera," she shouted after them. "Here you see," Kurama said mockingly, as did Naruto, feeling a faint response from the other bijou, which meant that they had managed to establish contact with him. "Yeah." The girl nodded mentally, and, looking at her frozen teammates, said with a chuckle, "Still, you will have to go with me to the ramen shop if, of course, you want to find out who they are and what they are doing here." Chapter 32, Genjutsu. Naruto, ignoring Kurama's grumbling, happily fluttered into the house, while humming some catchy songs she heard at Ramen Ichiraku, where she, Sasuke, and Sakura finally went after meeting with the jonen of the Sand Village. Actually, it was this trip that was the reason that the girl's mood was simply great now, even despite her failed plans. Even in the morning, Nera decided that she should finally have an explanatory conversation with her father on the topic. How, despite being very busy at work, a grown man needs to eat. And since Minato simply couldn't be found at home because of the upcoming Chunin exam, the girl was going to scold him right at work at the Hokage residence. So, by and large, the blonde could scold her father for neglecting proper nutrition, for which he himself so zealously advocated, forbidding Naruto to eat fast food at one time. But to spend the whole evening with your team at the ramen restaurant you loved from her past life, it was really worth a lot. Especially considering the fact that their relationship, thanks to these gatherings, became at least a little warmer. Because after her detailed story about the exam and their possible participation in it, the teenagers did not disperse, but sat in the restaurant for about another hour, having fun and talking about all sorts of minor trifles. And most surprisingly, Sasuke also took a direct part in this conversation, finally feeling a little freer in the company of not only Neru, but also Sakura. This made the girl incredibly happy, making her at least temporarily forget about all the bad things that happened and will happen in the future, because it was a very small victory, but it was hers. Dancing slightly, the blonde walked along the corridor, past the kitchen, completely ignoring the fact that her inner demon suddenly fell silent and grinned at something. Naruto, meanwhile, leisurely walked into her room and, throwing off her stuffy sundress, put on her favorite home clothes instead. My father's old, stretch t-shirt. Which, by the way, on the miniature kunoichi looked more like a house dress, reaching the girl to about mid-thigh. This thing, despite its shabby appearance, was the only one of the blonde's huge amount of clothing that allowed her to feel protected and loved, even when Minato was not at home in the evenings. This was the huge secret of the little girl living deep inside Naruto's heart, still unconsciously afraid of being completely alone. Smiling radiantly at her reflection, the girl, grabbing her comb from the chest of drawers, slowly headed towards the kitchen, finally turning her attention to the suspiciously quiet-tailed beast. "Hey, why are you silent?" Throwing her long golden locks over her shoulder, she asked, starting to carefully comb them as she walked. But in response, only the malicious giggle of the fox's muzzle was heard, which became louder and more suspicious with every step the girl took. "I think I asked you a question." "Enough," the blonde said sternly, hoping to put pressure on Kurama, who was probably once again planning some kind of dirty trick. However, upon crossing the threshold of the kitchen, Naruto froze abruptly, almost dropping the comb from her hands, finally understanding the reason for the strange behavior of the Ninetales. Directly opposite her stood a surprised Kakashi, who, having only briefly glanced at his ward, somehow shuddered strangely and instantly looked away. "You knew, you bastard!" He knew and remained silent. The kunoichi barked at the top of her lungs to herself, outwardly trying with all her strength to remain calm and not let the scarlet blush of embarrassment appear on her face. For if she were surprised or blushed in such a situation, her commander would definitely understand that the girl was not talking to him all this time. At least Naruto thought so, completely not noticing that her sensei was as embarrassed as she was. So, for the blonde, keeping face was a real problem, because the t-shirt that she wore out of habit was not at all suitable for receiving guests. Since Naru, thanks to Kurama's sarcastic comments and lamentations about how his beloved daughter from Minato had grown up, knew too well how vulgar this thing looked on her. The black fabric contrasted strongly with the pale skin and golden hair of the girl, literally drowning in oversized t-shirt, becoming even more fragile and defenseless. And the stretched neckline offered a simply gorgeous view of her thin neck, sharp collarbones, and part of her bare shoulder, literally screaming about what Naruto was thinking about. Too early. Therefore, the easiest thing for the blonde was to pretend to be a fool, simply not realizing the piquancy of the situation. And the main thing here was not to overdo it, because this could have the opposite effect, making her look like a real slut. "Yeah. If I told you about his coming, it wouldn't be so fun," the tailed trickster finally responded through his own hysterical laughter. "In general, you need to learn from your mistakes, so next time you will be more careful." The Ninetales fell silent for a second, sarcastically drawled, and added ironically, "Maybe," and then again exploded into a fit of laughter, literally causing his Jinchuriki to gnashing his teeth, because this time she had absolutely nothing to hide. But the girl just wanted to do it terribly. "Let's say you're right, Kurama, but that doesn't change the fact that you set me up in front of Kakashi again," the blonde snapped irritably, continuing to comb her hair with the last of her strength as if nothing had happened. So, without waiting for an explanation from Hatake, the girl, shrugging her shoulders in mock surprise, walked past him to the refrigerator, out of the corner of her eye noticing the scarlet paint on his cheeks and the tips of his ears visible from under the mask. "You'll have dinner with me, won't you?" Feeling incredible embarrassment and shame, standing with her back to the man, she asked Naruto in a calmer tone, skillfully pretending that before that she had also addressed him. "You know, Dad is rarely home lately, and because of this, I somehow feel completely lonely in the evenings," the girl said with a bit of sincere sadness in her voice, mentally hoping that she looked quite believable in her role. And turning over her shoulder to the copying ninja, she raised an eyebrow questioningly, expecting at least some kind of answer from the still silent man. "Oh, come on! But look how cute he is embarrassed!" The Ninetales laughed sarcastically, having managed to calm down slightly during his Jinchuriki's short monologue. And then, adding fuel to the fire, he mockingly drawled, "However, you are good yourself. Do you know how ambiguous your last phrase sounded?" Naruto frowned for a second, and then, once again running through this whole situation in her head, she almost fell. Fortunately, she was holding onto the refrigerator door with one hand. Yes, meanwhile, Kakashi nodded slightly confused, sitting down on one of the chairs, literally finishing off the student with a positive answer. I think sometimes it's nice to have something homemade. The copy ninja smiled slightly through his mask, trying to look anywhere but at his interlocutor, standing in front of him in only a t-shirt. Naru, nodding slightly nervously at the man so as not to think about it anymore, hurriedly turned to the refrigerator, trying to figure out what she could whip up with what was in it. Because no matter how you look at it, it was literally a mess in the refrigerator. After all, having had quite a hearty lunch at a ramen shop with Sasuke and Sakura, the girl decided that she was too lazy to go to the store on the way home, and it would be easier to just not have dinner. But more than that, the blonde was worried about how, for God's sake, she could change into something more decent without Kakashi noticing. Damn, I still had to go to the store. The girl snorted to herself, looking at the emptying shelves of the refrigerator. At least there would be one less problem now. She blurted out, going through all the recipes she knew in her memory and not finding one consisting of butter, soy sauce, and a huge amount of dried fish. God, why am I so lazy? The kunoichi moaned angrily, ready to fall through the ground from embarrassment, hopelessness, and shame. Just send your loved one to the store. The Nine-Tails mockingly drawled from the prompter's booth, clearly enjoying what was happening, but at the same time, as always, offering the most optimal solution to the problem. However, without waiting for gratitude from his vessel, the tailed one added in an overly malicious voice. Just like a real family. Stop mocking me, Kurama. The girl snorted irritably. Because of his words she somehow slammed the refrigerator too abruptly, and on stiff legs she turned to Kakashi, who was piercing her favorite orange tablecloth with an intense gaze. Although you, as always, are right. This is the only adequate option. Naruto quietly exhaled, gathering her strength, and trying not to think that her t-shirt was too short, she leaned her back on the tabletop so that her face was directly opposite Hatake. Kakashi, what would you like for dinner? With the last of her strength she drawled cheerfully, attracting the attention of the man, who finally looked at her openly. Curry, the copy ninja said, blurting out the first thing that came to his mind, probably for the first time in the entire time he met Naru, looking at her as at a real woman. However, the reminder that in 3 months she would only turn 14 years old, quickly swept all this out of the man's head, leaving only dull hatred for himself for such greasy thoughts. After all, if he had not agreed to Minato's offer to come here and talk with Naru about the exam in advance, if he had immediately attracted her attention, and not silently watched the girl dancing to her own melodious purring. If only, as soon as he saw his personal little son in this damn t-shirt, left or asked her to change clothes. Naruto, in Kakashi's opinion, was insanely, simply incredibly beautiful, smart, and damn it, he still admitted it after their voyage to the country of waves, terribly sexy. And what he felt when he looked at her in that damn t-shirt made her desperately want. But despite all these feelings, Naruto was still an innocent child, whom he, as her commander, her father's student and simply head over heels in love with the man, had to protect her. You always cooked it just perfectly, Naru, Hatake added, barely audible, in a hoarse voice, again looking away. God, he really is. The Nine-Tails spoke slightly surprised and chuckled, but bit his tongue in time, realizing that now was the best moment to stop, otherwise he simply would not be forgiven. And spoiling the relationship with his Jinchuriki was not part of the tailed one's plans, at least for now. What, is he really? Naruto snorted, trying to remember if they had curry rice at home. However, this is not so important, Kurama, because this is most likely your next joke. She almost immediately waved away the demon fox, who laughed nervously after her words. Well, if you want curry, Kakashi, go to the store. I'll jot down a list for you now. The blonde sang with excessive enthusiasm and, without waiting for her guest's answer, ran out of the kitchen like a whirlwind. For paper and pen. And after just a couple of minutes, Kakashi found himself at the threshold of his teacher's apartment with a large list in his hands, and Naruto waved goodbye to him with a sweet smile, having managed, in addition to writing the list itself, citing the cold, to pull on long leggings. Naruto, with an extremely happy look, cut the vegetables and meat brought by Hokage, watching out of the corner of her eye how the man mentioned above was reading his favorite book, written by her godfather. In fact, by putting on leggings and covering herself with a large apron, the blonde began to look more decent, allowing both herself and Hokage to feel more comfortable in each other's company. And now this truly strange day has become even more pleasant and magical for the girl than just a couple of hours ago. She even forgot about her anger at her tailed friend, who just recently set her up in front of her sensei. "I wonder why your Kakashi even came to us and where did he get the key?" Kurama, unexpectedly for his Jinchuriki, drawled questioningly. "So what do I owe your visit?" Having paraphrased the words of her Biju, almost immediately after the words of the tailed one, the blonde asked, who herself became curious to know the answer to this question. Kakashi, looking up from his book, looked at his student, seeming to be trying to remember why he had come here in the first place. Naruto, noticing his slightly confused look, added mockingly, trying to push him to the right thoughts. "I will never believe that you came here just to have homemade curry with me." "Yes, you're right, Naru. I wanted to talk to you about the upcoming jonen exam." Putting aside Jiraiya's book, the man spoke in an unexpectedly serious tone, causing the girl opposite him to tense up with these actions. Because from his facial expression and tone, it seemed to the blonde that he was leading to the fact that she would be completely banned from participating in it this year. After all, if you think about it, shouldn't Kakashi have informed his subordinates about it only tomorrow, giving them the right to decide for themselves whether they want to take part in this exam or not? "He doesn't want to say that I can't participate in it?" Naruto drawled to herself in fear, finally stopping cutting potatoes. In light of recent events and taking into account the character of her father, everything could have ended exactly like this. "Don't drift. If anything happens, they will greatly regret their decision." Kurama growled frighteningly quietly in her skull, thus trying to cheer up his Jinchuriki. "We both know, Naru, that you will never miss the opportunity to participate in this exam." The man continued to speak calmly and extremely judiciously, seemingly not even noticing how the blonde tensed and turned pale. "In general, the fact is that Minato-sensei asked me to talk about your safety during the upcoming exam, since lately you have been leading behave extremely recklessly, and this can be fraught with danger for both you and your team." Allowing her and the Nine Tails to finally relax, Kakashi said in a mentoring tone, preparing to lecture his former ward, and now subordinate. Sakura, Sasuke and Naruto once again, for more than an hour, were waiting for their extremely unpunctual sensei, who today, it seems, decided to break all conceivable and inconceivable standards of decency. However, this time the blonde was little worried about the lateness of her beloved, because she already knew perfectly well what Kakashi was going to tell them at today's meeting. And all because last night the copy ninja visited his student for the first time in a long time and, keeping her company at dinner, told her about the details of the upcoming jonen exam for their team. That is why Naru, unlike her teammates, was in extremely high spirits, skillfully ignoring Sakura's displeased grumbling and Sasuke's extremely gloomy appearance. After all, thanks to yesterday's conversation, she was sure that everything would be exactly as it should be. After another half hour, somewhere not far from the meeting place, a chakra well known to Naru flared. The girl perked up and, pulling a mask of indignation over her face, quickly jumped up to Sakura, who was muttering something incomprehensible, but clearly unkind. Carefully pulling her teammate back, the kunoichi pointed with her gaze in the direction where their unpunctual commander was supposed to appear, and winked at her. Sasuke, who noticed the strange behavior of his childhood friend and, unusually for girls from his team who did not get along with each other, synchronized nods, moved slightly and, like them, looked at the tall red torii standing slightly to the side of them. "Hi guys!" A couple of seconds later, a greeting was heard from Hokage, who suddenly appeared at the top of the torii. However, noticing the gaze of the teenagers, slightly angry and disappointed, the jonen almost slipped off his thin kasagi. "Today I got lost on the road of life." Having regained his composure, with an apologetic smile he informed his subordinates, whose faces screamed about what exactly they thought about his road of life. Judging by the time, he doesn't have a road there, but a whole labyrinth. The Nine-Tails chuckled ironically, just like everyone else, tired of waiting for his arrival, popping up in the blonde's consciousness at the exact moment when Sakura's loud cry was heard nearby. Yes, of course! Haruno barked with all her might, so that even Naruto standing next to her shuddered in fear and glanced sideways at her friend. Stop lying! It's already quieter, she added, snorting these words in annoyance at the confusedly chuckling man sitting on his haunches right on the top bar of the torii. Okay, here's the thing. Raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture, the copy ninja said soothingly and carefully jumped from his perch to the ground. This may come as a bit of a surprise to some of you, but I have nominated you to take the Chunin exam, he said seriously, looking straight into the confused faces of Sasuke and Sakura and the rather cheerful face of Naruto, who had learned this happy news yesterday. Ta damn! Kurama sang mockingly in a voice thoroughly saturated with sarcasm, which caused his smiling Jinchuriki to almost choke on air. What did you say? The pink-haired girl shouted again, piercing Kakashi with a strange, haunted look. That doesn't justify your being late, Kakashi-sensei. Naruto snapped, sternly measuring the man with Sasuke's grunt of agreement, completely diverting his attention from Haruno to himself. However, even so, her words did not particularly impress the man. He simply had no time for this, since Hatake was enthusiastically looking for something in the pockets of his jonen vest. Here are your permissions! Finally pulling out from one of his many pockets 3 small pieces of paper with information about the exam, the commander's signature and the name of the examinee, he said calmly, as if no one had told him anything before. Kakashi, I love you! The kunoichi literally shouted, having received her consent in her hands, and rushing at the man who carefully grabbed her by the waist, impulsively kissed him on the cheek. It should have been on the lips. Without his usual sarcasm, the Nine-Tails said contentedly, while everyone around them was in prostration due to the spontaneous actions of Naruto, who, it seems, did not expect this from herself. This permission does not oblige you to anything, after a minute, Kakashi said with a calm expression, after clearing his throat. At the same time, he still carefully held the blonde hanging on him by the waist, as if it was necessary. Should I try or not? You decide. He continued to speak, while Naru, having once again loudly kissed the man on the cheek covered with a mask, slipped out of his hands and, looking at the agreement with a smile, approached her teammates. Kakashi, unnoticed by the others, exhaled sharply and sedately continued his speech. Those who agree to try, sign the permission and come tomorrow at 4 in the afternoon to office 301, he said clearly, examining each of his subordinates in turn. And he didn't really like what he noticed when he looked at Sakura. The girl was clearly not only not happy about this exam, it seemed like she didn't want to give it up at all. However, neither he, nor even Sasuke and Naruto could convince Haruno to do this, because this decision should have belonged only to her. That's all, the sensei said dryly, looking once again at the incredibly happy blonde and the confused pink-haired girl, and disappeared in a cloud of white smoke. Well, Naru, are you going to convince your quarrelsome girlfriend to participate or are you going to let it go? The tailed man asked curiously as soon as the smoke cleared after Kakashi disappeared. His Jinchuriki, quietly glancing at the grinning Sasuke and the confused Sakura, who was uncertainly examining her permission, sharply exhaled all the air from her lungs, bringing her thoughts into relative order. No, Kurama, I'm just going to cheer her up. Naruto grinned to herself, and putting her permit in her pouch, she put her arm around the thoughtful girl's shoulders. Exam! She sang enthusiastically. There will probably be a lot of cool guys there, like you and me, guys. The blonde said with a militant grin, shaking Haruno slightly and putting her other hand around Sasuke's shoulders. The best in the entire stream, a member of the Uchiha clan and me, the daughter of the Hokage, she said with a laugh, pulling both of her teammates closer to her. We'll tear everyone apart. Naruto suddenly opened her eyes due to the loud roar of her tailed beast, which woke her up in a similar, absolutely barbaric manner almost every morning. Stretching sleepily, the blonde, who at the age of 10 had stopped jumping up because of such an alarm clock, as if scalded, glanced fleetingly at the clock, which showed almost 10 in the morning, and yawning sweetly, sat down on the bed. Mentally going through all the plans for today, which promised to be one of the most tiring in recent times, she slowly got up and walked towards the exit of the room. The reason for this iron confidence was the fact that today the first stage of the jonen exam was supposed to take place, at which Naruto had, in addition to the test itself, too many meetings with those who in the future would become like family to her: Rock Lee, Niji Hyuga, Tenten and their sensei Might Guy, the girls' former classmates and a couple of best friends whom she had not seen for almost a year and missed them madly. And with those who were supposed to become the enemy and, in the future, a real problem: Orochimaru's henchman Kabuto and his small fry, jonen from the village of Sound. And of course, there would be the jonen from the Sand Village, led by Gaara and his completely uncontrollable one-tailed beast. By the way, he and Kurama never contacted Shikaku, deciding to postpone this matter until the last stage of the exam. Because by then Naruto will be able to get close to his Jinchuriki enough to tell the guy that she is also a vessel for the bijou. After all, once upon a time, in the past future Kunoichi, they were like brother and sister, and the girl wanted to do everything possible to return that time. And this, in theory, should have helped Naruto and Kurama establish a strong connection with Gaara and Shikaku, which in the future, when the Akatsuki began to act, would greatly help them and all other Jinchuriki. And this will greatly help Gaara himself in reconciling with his uncontrollable tailed beast. So, continuing to think about her plans for the day, Naruto rushed out of her room in her shirt, and, still yawning, slowly walked to the bathroom. Only when the blonde, completely immersed in her thoughts, reached the door she needed, it, as if by magic, swung open in front of the kunoichi, letting out Minato, disheveled after his shower, in clouds of hot steam. The man took a deep breath of fresh air and shook his wet, sunny hair like a cat, carefully holding the towel wrapped around his hips. However, noticing his surprised and seemingly slightly blushing daughter, the blonde immediately dived back into the bathroom, slamming the door right in Naruto's face. Suddenly, the Nine-Tails chuckled laconically, emerging in the subconscious of his Jinchuriki, who was trying to move away from how handsome her father turned out to be. No, the kunoichi, of course, knew that Minato, at 37, is still quite an attractive man, whom women often stare at. But now, seeing him practically naked, the blonde realized the reasons for these views. Her father was simply a stunning man, capable of making anyone happy, but he lived only by work and caring for his daughter, completely ignoring his own happiness. Naruto understood that he was madly in love with her mother. She understood that only she herself helped him survive Kushina's death. But what will happen to him when she leaves him, becoming Kakashi's wife? You know, he hasn't changed much in the last 20 years, the tailed beast said thoughtfully, distracting his Jinchuriki from her gloomy thoughts. Kurama! The girl said unexpectedly loudly and cheerfully, causing everything in her inner world to stir in anticipation. You and I must find Dad a new wife, she said confidently, while the Nine-Tails whistled in surprise and snorted in approval, supporting his friend. Meanwhile, the door to the bathroom opened again, revealing the same Minato, but this time dressed in sweatpants and a simple black t-shirt. So, do you already have candidates for the role of your stepmother? Kurama asked ironically, looking through the eyes of his Jinchuriki at Minato, smiling sweetly at his daughter. Good morning, Naru, the man said affectionately almost simultaneously with the tailed beast and carefully patted the blonde's hair, tousled after sleep. Not yet, but we have to take a closer look, Naruto blurted out enthusiastically, squinting pleasantly at her father's touch. However, after a couple of seconds, she sharply opened her eyes and stared at him, as if she was seeing him for the first time in her life. Dad? The blonde responded in surprise, looking at her father with all his eyes, only now realizing that he, in fact, should be at work now. Why are you here at this time? She drawled, turning away from under the man's arm, and looked at him sternly. I took the day off to take my beloved daughter to the exam today, Minato said cheerfully, not at all embarrassed under his daughter's disapproving gaze. Although after a split second Naruto gave in and, exhaling sharply, smiled warmly at her father. Thank you, Dad, she said and, like in childhood, hugged Minato tightly. Go ahead, take a bath and prepare breakfast, otherwise at this rate you'll manage to be late by 4. Kurama snorted ironically, as always, completely ignoring the touching situation. Actually, Kurama seemed to be looking into the water, talking about their lateness for the exam. Finding herself at the large gate through which an impressive courtyard and the doors to the academy with the leaf symbol could be seen, about a minute before 4, Naru suddenly froze in her tracks, frightenedly clutching his father's hand like a little child. But the blonde was not afraid of strangers or the exam, which was only an hour away, but of the subsequent horror during the second stage. After all, only now did she finally realize that in the place of the third Hokage, who died in a fight with his renegade student, the Sannin Orochimaru, this time it would be Minato. He might die! The girl blurted out barely audibly, afraid not only to utter these words, but even to think about it was terribly scary. Naruto simply couldn't, having found her father again after being transported through time, lose him like that. Daddy might die today! She said a little louder, with hysterical notes in her voice, trying to behave outwardly, but her sharply pale face and the light tremula in her hands clearly betrayed the blonde's anxiety. Calm down. Without his usual ridicule, somehow strangely, calmingly, or something, the nine-tailed fox chuckled in response. We won't let this snake kill either Minato or that old man third. He snorted, practically growling this phrase. You yourself told me that this time you will save everyone. He immediately drawled with a touch of sarcasm, thereby trying to cheer up his friend, who decided at the wrong time to be afraid of the near future. But you yourself said that history. The girl said hesitantly, looking down. Leave it alone. With this attitude it's better to go and hang yourself right away. Interrupting her beginning hysteria in the bud, the tailed man barked angrily. After his words, the girl shuddered with her whole body as if from a slap in the face, as if coming to her senses. Naru, honey, are you okay? The man asked his daughter with a smile, still tightly gripping his hand, forcing him to look at himself. The blonde exhaled sharply and, smiling uncertainly, timidly nodded to her father, answering at the same time the tailed one in her inner world. And then, releasing Minato's hand, Naru took the first, fairly confident step outside the gate. The Shinobi Academy, where the first stage of the Chunin exam took place this year, greeted Naruto and her father with a din of many voices, just like on the first day of training here, making them forget about everything for a while, completely plunging into their new, happy past. In general, this whole situation seemed to mirror what happened almost 10 years ago, when the Kunoichi, hand in hand with Minato, first set foot on the territory of the academy as its full-fledged student. The only thing that has changed is that instead of first-year students and their parents, the courtyard was filled with dozens of teams of genin from different hidden shinobi villages talking to each other. However, seeing Hidden Leaf Village walking steadily through the yard of the Hokage Academy, the genin fell silent one after another, hesitantly glancing sideways at the girl in an orange jumpsuit, who looked like 2 peas in a pod, proudly walking a little ahead. Naruto, not paying any attention to this whole circus, with a wide smile headed towards her teammates standing aside, who, it seemed, did not even pay attention to all this fuss, if the deathly silence and tension that almost instantly reigned in the courtyard of the academy is even possible. It was called that. Hey Sakura, Sasuke, good morning! The girl shouted, speeding up a little, and as soon as the teenagers turned towards the voice, she intensively waved her hands at them. Her teammates looked at their late friend with sour expressions. However, a second later, when they noticed the Hokage behind her, the expressions on their faces changed to more frightened and admiring ones. Your father is a real star today. The Nine-Tails laughed mockingly, hinting at how others reacted to him. By the way, don't you think they'll hate you after such a convoy? He laughed sarcastically, starting to hear quiet whispers behind the Hokage and his daughter. Good morning, Uncle Minato, Sasuke responded with a respectful bow, quickly overcoming his surprise, for even as a child he was accustomed to often seeing the head of the village and considered him something like his own uncle. Let them hate, we are no strangers. Moreover, here everyone hates each other anyway. The girl grinned at his words, watching how Haruno slowly came to her senses. Oh, hi Sasuke, long time no see! The man responded with a smile, approaching the children. And I'm sorry that Itachi has been at work all the time these last few days. He drawled apologetically, since on his orders all A and BU members monitored the security of the village day and night. And he turned his gaze to the pink-haired girl standing a little to the side and looking at him with superstitious horror. Good morning, Hokage-sama, she mumbled, stuttering and blushing under Minato's attentive gaze. Do you think she can handle the anxiety and fear of the exam? The tailed beast asked doubtfully, observing the girl's behavior through the eyes of his Jinchuriki. Good, Sakura, right? The man responded softly, looking at the frightened girl. You can call me the same as Sasuke, because you and Naruto are friends. Smiling, he said to the blonde's nods of agreement. Can handle it, the kunoichi said confidently. Dad, we're already late, so see you tonight. She quickly chuckled and, grabbing Sasuke and Sakura by the arm, dragged them towards the entrance to the academy. Good luck! Minato shouted to them goodbye, like his daughter, ignoring the looks of the others, and disappeared from the yard with the help of the Thunder God technique, since he still had a not very pleasant meeting with the Kazekage. Naruto walked forward enthusiastically, dragging Sasuke with her, who didn't really resist, allowing his childhood friend to lead her forward, and Sakura, who was growing more and more gloomy with every step she took. This state of Haruno slightly worried the blonde since, having already changed the past quite a lot, it could unknowingly influence her decision whether to take part in the exam. After all, due to the strong pressure on a girl who had not yet revealed her full potential. Sakura, most likely, felt like a weak link in their team and could decide not to take this exam, considering herself simply unworthy. However, hearing loud swearing and sounds of fighting nearby, all three teenagers simultaneously turned their attention to the crowd of jonen surrounding one of the classrooms. Oh, looks like the show is starting? Kurama said sarcastically, popping up in the girl's mind when team number 7 found themselves in the crowd of jonen. Yeah! I just can't believe that Kotetsu and Izumo retook the Chunin exam so many times. The girl grinned at him in response, perfectly feeling the chakra she knew from childhood, hearing out of the corner of her ear the phrases of one of the genin of list who started a fight. Look, it's Rock Lee, Tenten and Niji! Naruto exclaimed enthusiastically, outwardly remaining just as calm and collected, listening extremely attentively to Kotetsu's monologue. Oh yes, these three are hard to forget. Especially the guy with the Byakugan. The Nine-Tails drawled respectfully, remembering how strong he was and exactly how he died. Mission failure, death of comrades. The Chunin is responsible for everything, because he is the squad leader. Kotetsu said seriously, now looking like a teenager about 3 years older than Naruto, with bandages on his cheeks and chin. Kids like you have no business taking the exam. He snorted in disgust, noticing the doubt on the faces of some of the genin. The second guy, who was Izumo, standing next to him with a serious look, nodded at the words of his comrade. This incredibly irritated the blonde and her bijou. Therefore, we weed out those who still won't pass. What's wrong with that? He asked mockingly, clearly beginning to mock those who were obviously weaker than him. You know, in some ways he's certainly right, but... The Nine-Tails snorted irritably, about to say something else, but abruptly fell silent upon hearing the Uchiha's words, greatly surprising his Jinchuriki. However, realizing what was going on here, the girl laughed restrainedly. Actually, I agree with you, but Sasuke said almost simultaneously with Kurama, going slightly ahead of his team, practically repeating his words. You will let us through and remove your genjutsu from this room, he said, judging by the evil roar of the tailed one, something similar to what he himself wanted to say. We need to go to the 3rd floor, he finished with a chuckle, and from all sides the whispers of genin were heard, who still had not seen through the deception. Ah, drawled Izumo, raising his voice for the first time in front of Naruto. So you noticed, he grinned, looking around with an arrogant look at the teenagers standing in front of him. Only when he noticed the daughter of their Hokage, he abruptly stopped grinning, becoming more serious. Actually, we all noticed that, right, Sakura? Turning to the pink-haired girl, the girl cheerfully asked, winking at her, knowing full well that the answer would be positive. Sasuke nodded approvingly and smiled encouragingly at Haruno, probably for the first time in their entire acquaintance. So that's what you meant by cheer up. The Nine-Tails laughed approvingly, seeing how the girl's eyes lit up. Your analytical skills and knowledge of genjutsu are the best on our team, the Uchiha said meanwhile, causing Sakura to blush and smile in embarrassment. Of course I figured it out, and for a long time, the girl said with enthusiasm, loudly and clearly, looking firmly at the older guys. Because it's the second floor. To the pleased giggles of Naru, Sasuke and the tailed one in the blonde's head, she said. The space behind the jonen of list imperceptibly began to blur, and the number on the office changed from 301 to 201. Not bad, but genjutsu that's not all, Kotetsu said dryly, swinging his leg towards Sasuke, who immediately put up a block, attacking back with his free hand. However, the blows of both fell on the hands of someone who had just recently been beaten, Rock Lee. An almost exact copy of her sensei in her youth, whom Naruto, thanks to Kakashi, met quite often. He, like Guy, wore a green jumpsuit with a Konoha protector tied at the waist, his hands were wrapped in bandages, and his legs were wearing bright orange leg warmers. What can we say about eyebrows, a bowl hairstyle and a white, sparkling smile? And this guy is good, Kurama remarked judiciously, looking through the eyes of his Jinchuriki as Sasuke and one of the bullies grimaced in pain. Yeah, Naru said in agreement, not wanting to interfere in all this, but after a fleeting glance at Sasuke, she changed her mind. Because she realized that for some reason her best friend was going to continue this senseless fight, which went against his character, Kotetsu. Izumo, maybe that's enough already? Do you really intend to fight children? In order to somehow stop her friend without resorting to her abilities, the girl said sternly, recalling her angry father at that moment. Naruto-sama. The men responded in unison, sharply taking on the appearance of those who usually guarded the entrance to the village, having never learned to address her with the prefix Sama. We were just following orders, Izumo said, noting that she recognized them quite quickly even when using high-ranking techniques. God, I hope it's not Dad, the girl muttered quietly, briefly looking at the members of Might Guy's team arguing about something and the noticeably calmed-down Sasuke and Sakura. We passed your test, right? The girl asked, wanting to get out of here as quickly as possible, because the attention that these two attracted to her by using this damn console incredibly irritated both her and Kurama. Of course, Naruto-sama, Kotetsu said to the synchronized roar of the Nine-Tails and his Jinchuriki, stepping aside to let her through. Wait! A guy in green overalls, whose wounds had already evaporated, suddenly shouted to Team Number 7, which was already preparing to leave. Hello? Approaching Sakura, he said, blushing slightly, and the blonde suddenly remembered that my name is Rock Lee, and you are Sakura, right? The guy embarrassedly asked the incomprehensible Haruno, who only nodded in surprise. Don't tell me he's now, Naruto said absent-mindedly, looking at the madness that was happening and feeling sorry for Lee in advance. It looks like it. He wants to offer her the same thing, Kurama said, laughing hysterically, apparently starting to pound the water with his fists. Be my girlfriend? He asked with a wide smile and, sticking his thumb up, added too cheerfully, I will always protect you. Neither. Behind. What? Sakura snapped, killing all hope for the guy with just her phrase. Cruel! Kurama chuckled approvingly, mockingly applauding the pink-haired girl's action. Oh, Naru said slightly pitifully. Okay, Sakura, Sasuke, let's quickly get out of here, the blonde blurted out, seeing that Niji was heading towards them. And this whole situation was already beginning to put pressure. Just look at the surprised and curious looks of the genin at her, the drooping Rock Lee and the look of Haruno, confused because of the guy's reaction. Therefore, Naruto, without waiting for the others, quickly started forward, hoping that Sasuke and Sakura would follow her. Chapter 33 Meet Might Guy, or the exam begins. Naruto, surrounded by her teammates, quickly walked towards the small training hall, where Irika-sensei once taught them the basics of jutsu. Actually, Team Number 7 decided to go through this hall, and not along the stairs, like everyone else, for several fairly compelling reasons. Firstly, using this path, they took a shortcut, but still, to the 301st office they needed, where, in theory, the jonen should have been about 10 minutes ago. Secondly, in this very simple way, the teenagers in one fell swoop significantly reduced the number of people they met on the way to the office. Still, after the performances in the courtyard and the corridor of the second floor, not only the Leaf jonen, but also almost all the participants in the exam showed too much interest in them. However, this is understandable. Whatever one may say, the only daughter of the youngest Hokage in the history of Konoha, the young genius of an almost extinct powerful clan, and a rather mysterious girl who strangely found her way into their team. These three unwittingly attracted a lot of attention that no one needed right now. And thirdly, which only Naruto knew, in a similar way, Team Number 7 should have been able to avoid their second meeting with Rock Lee this time. No, Naru, of course, valued him as a loyal friend, an immensely positive person, and a fairly strong ally. But now, taking all the circumstances into account, the Kunoichi decided that it was better for Sasuke and Sakura not to meet with him again today. The Uchiha had already been constantly on edge in recent months, taking everything too personally and losing his temper for absolutely any reason, which was not observed in his previous life. Therefore, a battle with Lee in such a state threatened him with serious consequences, because Guy's student was now undeniably stronger than Sasuke. Sakura, despite the fact that after meeting Kotetsu and Izumo was slightly cheered up, she still felt uneasy because of the upcoming exam, for which she did not think she was ready yet. The loss of her ideal. Sasuke could easily tip the scales of Haruno's resolve in the opposite direction, ruining their team's chances of participating in this year's Chunin exam. And if Naruto could survive this quite easily, slightly adjusting her plans, then Sasuke would simply hate her for such cowardice, which prevented him from moving forward. At least the current one, he definitely would not have said thank you to the pink-haired girl, if he would have started talking to her at all. So it turned out that they should have delayed a little with some acquaintances. It seems like you won't be able to escape this guy after all. The Nine-Tails laughed in the girl's head when Team Number 7 found itself right in front of the doors leading to the training room they needed. What an ambush! Naruto cursed to herself to the ironic giggle of the tailed beast. For it was initially her brilliant idea to take a detour, and now, standing right in front of the door to the hall they needed, it would be simply stupid to change her decision. Therefore, quietly inhaling, the Kunoichi cheerfully pushed the door, entering the spacious room where the next act of the theater of the absurd was to take place. Maybe I should stop them before the fight? The blonde said thoughtfully, walking deeper into the room to a small staircase on the opposite wall, clearly sensing foreign chakra on the far balcony, from which students usually watched the training battles of their classmates. Come on, Naru, let them fight! Kurama snorted mockingly at her words, not paying even the slightest attention to her slightly worried tone. A couple of extra bruises and abrasions won't do anything to your vile Uchiha. The Nine-Tails drawled ironically, sincerely not understanding the fears of his Jinchuriki. Yes, this guy, in comparison with their previous life, has changed a lot, but the situation itself is radically different, because now Sasuke hates not a person close to him, but some kind of abstract organization of nukening for him. By the way, no one told the guy about Danzo, because being, unlike Itachi, extremely hot-tempered, he could have messed up and lost his life before he managed to get to the area where Root's former base was located. However, she appeared to her ex only in words. This one, having enlisted the support of the village elders who had broken away from Hiruzen, who, in theory, was supposed to become their voice of reason, still maintained a rather impressive squad, or rather a mini-army, loyal only to its master. Hey, dark-haired! Under Kurama's disgusting giggle, Rock Lee's even voice echoed through the hall, interrupting the girl who was already ready to object to the Nine-Tails. The three teenagers stopped abruptly, just short of reaching the stairs, and without saying a word, simultaneously turned to the speaker, who was piercing them with his black eyes. Naru unconsciously tensed literally with her skin, feeling her friend's irritation and her friend's anxiety, while simultaneously wondering whether she should still intervene in this conflict. However, this was not the only thing that excited the girl. Somewhere on the periphery, the chakra of Tenten and Niji was clearly felt. It looks like this proud guy didn't come alone today. Abruptly cutting off the giggles and sniffing a little, the immediately wary Ninetails literally repeated her thoughts. It looked like these two were somewhere very close, remaining in the shadows to collect information and provide backup for their teammate. And this radically changed the matter, because now to reveal her abilities to Niji, the strongest jonen of the Hidden Leaf Village, with whom she would have to fight in the future, in order to stop two, was an extremely bad idea. It looks like, no matter how you look at it, there will be a battle. The tailed reptile suddenly cheered up to the disappointed clicking of his Jinchuriki. What do you want? Meanwhile, Sasuke asked dryly, piercing with an indifferent look at the stranger who called out to him. Would you like to fight me right now? Lee asked, tilting his head slightly to the side as Sakura and Naruto quietly cursed. But they were wailing for completely different reasons. Unlike Haruno, who simply did not expect to meet this strange guy again, the Kunoichi had a rough idea of what their battle would lead to if she did not intervene. And this meant that she, most likely, would have to show everyone a little ahead of time what exactly the Hokage's daughter, who was always lazy at the academy, was capable of. Shut up already and finally offer something worthwhile. The blonde snorted to herself, not taking her eyes off the guy in the green overalls, still hoping that the battle could somehow be avoided without her intervention. Fight? Meanwhile, the Uchiha drawled slightly arrogantly, measuring the guy on the balcony with an appraising gaze and grinning. It was clear from his entire appearance that this time he was interested in the guy who had withstood his blow, and wanted to fight Rock to test himself. Only the blonde remembered well that her childhood friend did not know how to lose. Until he can, right now? He asked, continuing to stare at his unexpected opponent. Yes. The guy responded proudly and, immediately jumping over the railing, jumped from the balcony, only to smoothly land right in front of Sasuke a second later. My name is Rock Lee, he said, as if no one had heard how, just 5 minutes ago, Sakura had scolded him rather harshly in the corridor. Do you think maybe this time our formidable Uchiha will be able to do it? Ignoring Naruto's words, the tailed one chuckled, finally stopping mocking what was happening. However, Kurama really believed that this time Sasuke had every chance of defeating this proud guy. Think about it, lately all he's been doing is training with his brother and his friend. The tailed man said thoughtfully, trying to convince his Jinchuriki to let go of the situation. If you want to know someone's name, you have to say yours first, right? Meanwhile, Lee continued, completely ignoring the presence of a couple of other people in the hall. Sakura, out of surprise and shock, opened and closed her mouth like a goldfish, looking from Sasuke to Rock Lee and back. And Naruto, contrary to his racing thoughts, outwardly remains completely calm, looking with a bored look at the guys as if they were complete. I still have to stop them. This time, completely ignoring the words of her tailed beast, the blonde stated the fact, feeling with her gut that if she didn't do this, then they simply wouldn't get into the exam. Sasuke Uchiha, Naruto's childhood friend, introduced himself with feigned calmness, stepping forward a little. But it looks like you already knew that, he said ironically, and if the Kunoichi knew him worse, she would have suspected open mockery in the guy's words. You, as always, just want to ruin everything and ruin everyone. The nine-tailed demon fox drawled feignedly offended, partly understanding the blonde's train of thought, but despite this, sincerely believing that she was now making a big mistake. I want to fight with you and find out what my strength is worth in a battle against the heir of the legendary clan, Lee retorted calmly, as if he had not heard Sasuke's words before. Besides, throwing an embarrassed glance at the still dumbfounded Sakura, he drawled hesitantly, quieter. Haruno shuddered and blinked in disbelief, dying away. Rock, having clearly accepted her action somehow in his own way, clumsily winked at the girl. At that same second, the tailed one in Naruto's head exploded into wild laughter, as, in fact, did the girl herself, immediately forgetting about all her throwing, masterfully masking laughter under coughing attack. No! The pink-haired girl immediately began to scream with a ringing cry that echoed throughout the entire hall, and casting a fleeting evil glance at the still, coughing, blonde, who had not even noticed him, she grimaced. Eyelashes from below, not that, Sakura said hysterically, sharply recoiling behind her teammates. She continued, pointing her finger at the disadvantages she listed. However, Lee himself seemed to not care about her words. He looked at the pink-haired girl with immense adoration and even love, as if she was complimenting him. I figured it out. Let your friend stop this fight, Kurama said through laughter, seemingly starting to beat his fists on the watery surface of the inner world of his Jinchuriki. No matter how you look at it, he's going to fight for her heart and hand. Laughing, he exhaled, forcing Naruto to calm down sharply with his words and look appraisingly at Sakura, who was still extending her finger in the direction of the guy. You are my angel! Fully confirming his view, Lee literally sang and blew Haruno a kiss with a stupid smile. The girl, shuddering, jumped back sharply, leaving the flight path of his kiss and exhaled with relief. No, Sakura is not suitable for this role, she just doesn't understand that Sasuke is weaker than this guy, Nara said at the same time, having carefully considered the tailed man's words. But you can use it! The girl continued with a chuckle, looking at how Haruno exploded again with a cry, and Lee somehow tried to calm her down. This whole situation was just terribly comical. You knew who I was, but you still challenged me? Interrupting their thoughtless chatter and Nara's plans, the Uchiha finally drawled, slowly but surely losing his temper. He thought this guy a serious opponent, but in reality it turned out that he was a simple buffoon, chasing girls. From this tone, the kunoichi and her tailed beast suddenly became unable to laugh, since it was precisely this tone that Sasuke used when he left the village. The Uchiha, once again measuring the genin, who was flushed with an embarrassed blush because of Haruno's words, added with a frowning glance, simply put, you. RR. Naru, maybe you'll still let them fight? Kurama immediately responded in a completely serious tone. I'd bet all my 9 tails that your friend will last many times longer this time, and maybe even defeat this brovastic. He drawled thoughtfully, finally conveying his thoughts to the blonde, who flinched in surprise. She looked at the Uchiha appraisingly and whistled mentally. His chakra was seething, literally overflowing its owner. You will soon understand what this name means. Taking a stance, Sasuke grunted, and his chakra shot up sharply, echoing its owner. You're wrong about something, Kurama, the girl said, closing her eyes for a moment, finally understanding what the Ninetales was telling her. Sasuke, from the very day they returned from the Land of Waves, trained every day with the Tachi or Shursui, practicing the techniques of their clan. And considering that lately their tasks had been reduced to banal shopping trips or walking the dogs, Naruto simply could not see the result of these trainings before. And now, according to Kurama, Sasuke had a real chance to defeat not only Lee, but also Nara herself with all her tricks from her past and this life. Sasuke may have developed his Sharingan to a certain level, but Lee uses only taijutsu, which he has brought to almost perfection. Therefore, the Uchiha eyes are not scary for him, and the reaction is too fast, she said to the strange, dissatisfied chuckle of the tailed one, who clearly thought that she was overreacting. However, this only made the girl happy, because Kurama for once took Sasuke's side. Let's see, just like the Uchiha, standing in a stance, Rock said with a grin, gesturing for him to attack. Kurama, I promise that I will definitely let them fight at full strength next time, the blonde drawled, hearing the tailed one muttering in her head, while in a smooth movement she grabbed her childhood friend by the shoulders from the back. Sasuke, being on edge, twitched nervously, wanting to free himself, but noticing the long golden locks that fell on his shoulder, he froze abruptly, lowered his hands and exhaled, relaxing slightly. Well, well, boys, you should stop there today, she sang with a wide smile to the choked sigh of Sakura, who, on the one hand, was delighted by her actions that stopped the fight, on the other I was jealous. The exam starts in half an hour, we don't want to be late, do we? She drawled, laying her head on the guy's shoulder, and then, under Kurama's irritated hiss, in a languid half-whisper, so that only he could hear her, she added, Sasuke, please let me sort things out. The Ninetales suddenly growled menacingly at the girl who did not understand anything, who in surprise pressed herself even closer to the Uchiha. I told you, keep your distance from him. He snorted a little more restrainedly, but at the same time in an extremely dissatisfied tone. Fine, the guy responded, somehow choked up. Nara decided to ignore the incomprehensible outburst of anger from Kurama, because she absolutely did not know what came over her tailed tenant, and automatically fleetingly kissed the Uchiha on the cheek, as she did in childhood, when he gave her sweets. Naruto! Sakura cried out, while Sasuke himself shuddered for some reason, and Lee blinked his big eyes in disbelief. The Ninetales barked at the same time as Sakura, flaring up again, but after a moment his mood completely changed. Although you know what, I don't care. He literally spat out a phrase soaked in malice, which had not happened since the war with the goddess Kagaya. But then don't whine, you'll handle it all yourself. He snorted and fell silent abruptly, disappearing deep into the inner world of his Jinchuriki, leaving her alone with her misunderstanding and questions. Hey Kurama, what were you talking about just now? The blonde shouted to him as if into the void, but remained unanswered. How can you? Sakura continued to nag her in the outside world, forgetting even Lee, who was still standing opposite them. What's the problem, Sakura? Turning around, Naruto coldly inquired, brought out by her tailed beast. The pink-haired girl shuddered and fell silent, staring at such an unusually serious girl who was still hugging Sasuke. He and I grew up together, so, she drawled vaguely, trying to convey to Haruno that it didn't mean anything. Naruto then released the Uchiha from her arms and, coming out from behind him, smiled widely at Lee. Good afternoon, Rock, right? The girl said, watching the attentive gaze of black eyes. The guy nodded hesitantly in response, in no hurry to relax. So, Lee, you will fight Sasuke today only by defeating me. The blonde said in a surprisingly gentle tone, continuing to smile. I don't need you. The guy snapped, waving her away. I need an Uchiha, he said, looking behind the girl where Sasuke and Sakura stood. Everyone needs him. Kurama's voice popped up in my head with ironic remarks. First, I would like to ask the other two members of your team to stop hiding. Barely restraining herself from laughing, a lump stuck in her throat, she said kindly, agree. Provoke someone into a fight in order to collect information about him. Disgusting. Nara chuckled and, turning away from Lee, looked at the far balcony, from where the flow of foreign chakra could be felt. When the figures of those whom they had seen in the corridor appeared from the shadows, Haruno exhaled in surprise, and Sasuke cursed restrainedly, realizing how stupid he had been. A member of the Hyuga clan and a clanless girl, that's what I thought, Naruto grinned, crossing out the censor's abilities from what would be a surprise for Neji during their battle. Whatever one may say, before that all the key moments repeated her past life, so the battle during the last stage of the exam should not have let us down. The guy and the girl, meanwhile, looked at each other strangely and, like Rock before, jumped from the balcony. I understand, you're stalling for time, the Ninetales said, having calmed down, as if there had never been this outburst of anger, looking through the eyes of a kunoichi as these two slowly approached their teammate. Naruto mentally agreed, realizing that it was better not to come to him with questions now. Are you waiting for your favorite sensei's best friend? And I really hope that it will work out for me. The blonde chuckled to herself. Naruto-sama, Neji said politely, showing respect to the Hokage's daughter. He was still just a child, but his face was stern, and his gaze was hard and cold, which instantly reminded the kunoichi of what his childhood was like, full of injustice and prohibitions. Otherwise, Neji Hyuga was the same as Nara remembered him from her past life. The hair, which reached the middle of the back, was braided just above the end, a black protector that fits tightly to the forehead, covering the shameful mark applied to all members of the clan from a side branch. He was wearing a khaki shirt, dark brown shorts, blue shinobi sandals, and bandages wrapped around his right arm and leg. And I remember you, Neji, right? She responded with a warm smile, continuing to look at her old new acquaintance, who in a past life left this world too early, but managed to save her life more than once. Why talk to her, Lee? You wanted to fight the Uchiha, so go ahead. Interrupting the guy who was already ready to answer, who clearly did not expect that the one with whom they had briefly crossed paths only once would remember him, A girl with dark brown hair gathered in two buns and large brown eyes shouted. This daring girl was dressed in a light pink vest and blue loose pants that reached her mid-calf. The exam will start in 20 minutes, just turn her off, she snorted, measuring the short, seemingly weak blonde with a slightly arrogant look. 10-10. Shush Niji's girl. It was unclear why he was more worried because of rules, etiquette, or the possible wrath of the Hokage. Who does she take us for? The tailed one drawled offendedly, clearly offended by the assessment of the strength of his Jinchuriki from some jonen. It seems like you're the only polite person on your team, Niji. The blonde drawled, accompanied by Kurama's chuckle and Sasuke's grunt of agreement, watching as the girl opposite stopped short, looking at her interlocutor differently. I'll give you an owl, she continued to speak, but was interrupted by a loud voice that was familiar to her down to the smallest detail. Enough! Might Guy's cry echoed throughout the hall, only instead of the man she knew well, a rather large turtle appeared right in the middle of the hall. Naruto, intuitively, quickly jumped back to her team and grinned nervously, noticing out of the corner of her eyes that her teammates were in a complete stupor. He's just a master! The horse Kurama immediately neighed, watching as Guy's team began to quarrel with this same turtle, for some reason speaking in the voice of their sensei. Even the previously gloomy Sasuke let out something akin to a nervous chuckle when the reptile began to scold his team. What can we say about Sakura and Nara, who can barely contain their laughter at this picture? Are you ready to accept punishment for starting fights? Meanwhile, the turtle asked sternly and, having received affirmative nods in response from three teenagers who managed to come a little closer to her, continued, Then here I am. She shouted loudly, and then Might Guy himself appeared on the turtle shell in a strange position and his usual tight green tights. This was the last straw for Naruto, who, unlike Sasuke and Sakura, was not afraid or surprised, but, echoing her inner demon, laughed. Oh yeah! I see the flame of youth burning within you! Guy shouted, greeted by loud girlish laughter. He's in his repertoire! Kurama drawled through laughter, seeming to be falling into real hysterics. I didn't expect anything less from him. The blonde responded while exhaling, and then, looking carefully at the man, shouted, Brovastic. Hey, stop making fun of Guy-sensei, Lee said, shaking his fist at her to the amazingly synchronized nods of his team. Naru, is that you? Turning to the well-known nickname, the man asked, peering at the trio of Team Number 7, Team Hitaki. For you I. Naruto-sama, you bastard! Just as the blonde said in childhood, even then beginning to repeat this phrase for Kakashi, who at one time, to put it mildly, did not like Guy. That's it! Kurama shouted, applauding, while everyone else, who did not know that these two had known each other for a long time, was in a state of shock. How is Kakashi-sensei doing? Ignoring her words, Might asked, seeming to have already forgotten that he wanted to punish his subordinates. Does he know Kakashi? Sakura asked Naruto in surprise, but instead of the blonde, the chuckling Guy decided to answer this question. Do I know him? Grinning and closing his eyes, he repeated to the quiet swearing of the kunoichi, his students and Kurama, and then simply disappeared from sight. However, Naru still followed his movements, or, more precisely, the movement of his chakra. Therefore, when he found himself behind Team 7, she immediately turned around, lightly tugging Sasuke and Sakura behind her. We are called eternal rivals, the man said, opening his eyes, wanting to slightly scare the children, but immediately met three pairs of eyes. However, he got over his surprise as quickly as he found himself behind them. 50 victories and 49 defeats. I am stronger than Kakashi, he said, flashing a smile, giving him a thumbs up. Something is wrong with this account of his, Kurama said suspiciously, seeming to be calculating something in his mind. Speaking of time, the Nine-Tails chuckled ironically to the frightened, of his Jinchuriki. Thank you, the blonde sang, looking searchingly at the man in front of her in the outside world. I doubt. She giggled and then added with a laugh. We have to go, even the Hokage's daughter won't wait for the exam. Tenten's face, which had been rude to her at the beginning of their acquaintance, suddenly turned pale. And Naru, grabbing her teammates by the arms, concentrated on the seal on the back of Kakashi, who was supposed to be waiting for them at the entrance to the desired audience. Kakashi was waiting for them, as Naruto thought, right at the entrance to the 301st office, and, judging by the expression on his face, he was thinking that his team would not come today after all. Therefore, when the three of them suddenly appeared right next to him, the man was slightly surprised and looked at his favorite student with slight condemnation. However, Naruto understood perfectly well why he had such a look, since about 15 minutes ago she herself was thinking about how to avoid the battle in order to keep all her skills a secret. But firstly, they were very late, and secondly, the company of Guy, Lee, Niji and Tenten tired her out. More precisely, Rock Lee was tired of this team. Tenten was rather stubborn and straightforward, but the member of the Hyuga clan was the complete opposite of both of them, bringing a bit of reason and calculation into their squad. He was always calm and collected, masterfully ignoring the noisy members of his team and the same sensei. So, having thought about it, the blonde realized that there was no point in hiding all her techniques. It would be much easier if everyone thought that she, a lazy daddy's little girl, could only use the Thunder God technique. Because when no one expects anything from you, it's easier to surprise. Oh, and Sakura came, the jonen said approvingly. I hope she did it of her own free will, Naru? Kakashi asked with a sly smile, nodding towards the large round clock hanging on the opposite wall. Well, shall we hand over the browed one to your beloved? Meanwhile, Kurama asked ironically, while Sakura excitedly told Hatake about the reasons for their lateness and her full consent to participate in this exam. Of course we will, because our sensei is the strongest. The kunoichi laughed, but abruptly interrupted and thoughtfully added, after Dad, of course. And then, waiting for the pink-haired one to mention might in her story, she most brazenly inserted herself into her story. Can you imagine? The Brovastic said that he is stronger than you. The blonde drawled in disbelief, attracting the attention of Hatake, who, hearing her words, frowned slightly and nodded, taking this information into account. Exactly, Kakashi-sensei. Guy-sensei said that your count is 4950. Haruno immediately confirmed her words, not really understanding what kind of score we were talking about. In general, after going to the ramen shop, Sakura and Naruto's relationship improved noticeably. At least from that moment they never quarreled, and Haruno stopped criticizing the blonde at every step, even agreeing with her from time to time. Why did Sakura have to come to the exam herself? Wanting to somehow return the topic of conversation to the right direction, Sasuke asked. Oh, this. According to the rules of the exam, only teams of 3 people are allowed to take the exam. The man answered, putting his hands in his pants pockets, with a smile barely visible through his thick mask. Sakura groaned and looked back at Sasuke and Naruto in fear. What? Haruno said, turning back to her sensei. But you yourself said that everyone can decide for themselves whether to pass or not, she said, looking searchingly at the still smiling man. Looks like your pink-haired burden is feeling a little ashamed. The tailed one drawled ironically in Naruto's head, looking at the girl with her eyes. The blonde chuckled in agreement, glad in her heart that she decided to remain silent about this part of the exam, even despite Sakura's condition. After all, now she stood here of her own free will, and if Naru had told this earlier, Haruno would have come here out of stubbornness and duty. Even if she and Sasuke had not asked her for anything. And if Sakura had done this, the exam would have simply crushed her, breaking her before she even realized what she really wanted to do. If I had told the truth, Sasuke or Naruto would have convinced you to go. Meanwhile, Kakashi said, looking with approval at the daughter of his former sensei. He didn't know this for sure, but for some reason it persistently seemed to him that his omnipresent, uncontrollable ward was aware of this condition. That's why, when 3 of his subordinates appeared right in front of him, he decided that the blonde had forcibly dragged Sakura here. Even if you didn't want to, I would come. For Sasuke's sake. Well, Naruto too. What if they came together? Haruno asked doubtfully. Then by evening she would have to seek political asylum from the Akatsuki. The tailed one scoffed, which caused a laugh from his Jinchuriki, However, taught by bitter experience, the girl skillfully hid it behind a cough. Then this would be the end of Sasuke and I's exam. The girl responded enthusiastically, mentally shaking her fist at her laughing Bijou. Kakashi nodded to himself, realizing that this time he was right. Naruto, in some unknown way, learned about another condition of the exam. She found out, but remained silent. It's just that the reasons for such awareness, even if the daughter of the Hokage, but only a 13-year-old girl, alarmed him. She always knew everything, from the uniform worn by the Root Anbu to the bloody exam held even before her birth in the Hidden Mist village. Of course, all this could be attributed to the fact that Naruto, because of her status, had been trying since childhood to keep at home, which is why the girl read a lot and poked her little nose into places where no one except the Hokage should delve. But it still bothered him a little. But you are here. Kakashi spread his hands, this time saying it with a wide smile. I'm proud of you guys, he said, and, moving a little to the side, nodded towards the office door. Now go. Yes, here we go. Team 7 responded in unison, entering the auditorium where the strongest genin from all the hidden villages had gathered. Minato, awaiting the arrival of an important guest, sat alone in his office in the Hokage residence, collecting his thoughts. According to generally accepted rules, 2 Kage had to be present at the exam, one from the village in which the exam took place, the other chosen by lot. This time it was not needed. The head of the Hidden Sand village himself expressed a desire to be one of the participants in the commission, because this year 3 of his children participated in the exam. For the same reason, the Kazekage decided to arrive not only at the last stage, where those who will receive the title of Chunin, like this one, will be determined required by the regulations, but at its very beginning. Behind closed doors, his assistants, elders and guards were noisy, finishing the final preparations, while the blonde tried to tune in to what was not the most pleasant company for himself. But for some reason, today, time after time, all of Minato's thoughts returned to his wife, whose photograph stood next to photographs of Naruto on the edge of his desk. So bright with her scarlet hair like blood, how he missed her love, warmth and care, noise and clumsiness, crazy ideas and adventures, and most importantly support. Only thanks to Kushina was he able to become a worthy shinobi, was able to go through all the horrors of the Third World War and become what he dreamed of being in childhood, while still a foolish boy. In exchange for all this, he was never able to fulfill her dreams of a family and children. He could not save her. Kushina so wanted to become a mother. She dreamed of how she would nurse her daughter. For some reason his wife was sure that they would have a girl. Watch how it grows. And it was on the day when Naruto was born, on the day when they should have become the happiest on earth, that his beloved wife died. She left Minato all alone with their long-awaited child, shattering all dreams of a big happy family against the wall of harsh reality. It's only a miracle that although he turned out to be an unexpectedly reasonable and flexible nine-tailed demon fox, remained alive, but buried his heart along with Kushina. Now, seeing how quickly his Naruto was growing, so similar to her mother in character, becoming stronger and more independent every day, Minato was terribly afraid and longed for the moment when she would leave her old man. After all, already now his little girl was gradually beginning to move away, spending more and more time with her team and their commander. Kakashi, his only surviving student, who was always the best in everything, was truly worthy of Naruto's love. Minato had no doubt that in the future they would be together, and instead, he and Kushina would create the family they had once dreamed of. When this happens, Minato will finally be able to go to his beloved wife, leaving everything dear to his heart to the student who has long been like a son to him. He knew that Kakashi would one day become Naruto's wonderful husband, the father of their children, and most likely, the Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. Minato-sama, are you ready? Shikako called from behind the doors, finally tearing the blond man away from his gloomy thoughts, looking into his superior's office. The Kazekage will arrive in less than half an hour. You should immediately go to the main hall, the head of the Nara clan said calmly, stopping right in front of the doors. Already? Minato responded in confusion, looking with an unfocused gaze at his subordinate. Has the first stage of the Chunin exam begun? Having collected his thoughts, he immediately asked, glancing at his watch. 5 minutes ago, Minato-sama. Shikaka nodded, perfectly understanding the Hokage's worries. The blonde, meanwhile, rose to his feet and, slightly straightening his cloak and veil on his hat, smiled. Let me know the results as soon as it's finished, he said as he walked past his subordinate. Chapter 34 The First Stage, or Devil. Kakashi sighed heavily, looking at the door that closed behind his subordinates, leading them to the world of adult, cruel, and dangerous shinobi. Many said that his team was not yet ready for such a test, that they were still children who graduated from the academy less than a year ago, and were simply not yet able to endure such a test. That they are not ready to be chunin yet. Even Guy, who caught Hatake after a meeting with the Hokage at which teams were presented to participate in the exam, believed that at least a year should pass before the genin decided to try to become a chunin. After all, this is an incredibly huge responsibility and burden. But Kakashi, partly agreeing with the opinions of others, still gave permission to his subordinates to participate. Because he, unlike the majority, put a slightly different meaning into participating in this exam, wanting to show his charges how harsh the shinobi world is and how difficult it is to become a truly strong ninja in this world. Whatever one may say, this will become an extremely valuable lesson for each of them, pointing out the most serious miscalculations. It was simply vital for Sasuke to become at least a little more tolerant, because his obsession with revenge turned a calm, calculating, and talented guy into a hot-tempered fool who was simply ruining his life. Sakura had to finally believe in her strength and potential, which Hatake had clearly seen in her over the past months. Naruto, at first glance, an excellent kunoichi, already ready for the rank of chunin, had the biggest problems of all three. The most lively and gifted of her team, she was surprisingly calm and reasonable in any, even the most stalemate, situation. At the same time, this girl was clearly aware of her strengths and capabilities, constantly developing and moving forward. But his sensei's daughter still did not realize the simple truth, what it means to work in a team. She always tried to do absolutely everything herself, trying to protect her loved ones from danger. And this concerned not only her friends and teammates, who needed not protection, but the experience of a real battle, but also Minato, Irika, and himself. Not realizing that such behavior would quickly lead her to loneliness and pain. He knew this for sure, because at her age the copy ninja was exactly the same, as a result of losing everyone who was dear to him, realizing too late that protecting everyone in it's simply impossible to do it alone. Naru went ahead, often getting into places where there was no place for a child, completely forgetting that the cost of this was the lives of both her and her comrades. And a striking example of this was the night when the Uchiha clan ceased to exist. Kakashi saw perfectly well that the blonde knew that something like this would happen, it's unclear where, but I still knew, but remained silent, deciding to figure it out on her own. The whole village knows how it ended. My name is Naruto Namikaze, and I will show everyone where the crayfish spend the winter. Came the loud cry of his beloved student from behind the door, causing a warm, soft, but slightly sad smile, clearly visible through the man's thick mask. Naru, as always, was in her repertoire, and something told Hatake that she could really tear everyone apart, including Ibiki. At the same time, incurring the wrath of the other genin not only on herself, but also on her teammates. And this was also a huge problem for the girl. Kakashi, your student is truly impressive. Guy's familiar cheerful voice was heard behind him, which instantly wiped the smile from the copy ninja's face, replacing it with a grin. The man has not yet forgotten what his subordinates told him. The sparkling power of youth just pours out of her. He continued to speak, moving closer to his old friend and trying to put his hand on his shoulder. But Hatake, taught by bitter experience, masterfully wriggled out from under this trap, standing directly opposite his interlocutor. Still would, the man chuckled restrainedly, looking up at his smiling friend, and hid his hands in his trouser pockets. You know, she and the younger Uchiha are just a wonderful couple. Guy continued to speak in an even more cheerful tone, interrupting Kakashi, who was already about to ask him about the strange account of their victories and defeats. The man frowned and looked blankly at his interlocutor, as if demanding an explanation from him. For who else but him, who had been literally following him on his heels for many years now, knew that since childhood, all of Naruto's love belonged only to him and Minato. And since his sensei was the girl's father, it was natural to assume that Naru and Sasuke could not be a couple for one simple reason: Naru loved him. You're probably glad that she finally gave up her attempts to make a cracker like you, Kakashi, fall in love with herself and switch to her peer. Without noticing the extremely gloomy face of the copy ninja, the man in green tights continued to speak with a wide smile, clearly remembering something extremely good from the past. Wow, how she kissed him! And the boy immediately blushed and became subdued, relaxing in her fragile arms. You can immediately see good couple. Hatake blinked incomprehensibly, slowly realizing the words spoken by Guy, feeling how somewhere deep inside him an unusual hatred was arising. But not to Naruto or Sasuke, but to himself, because he dared to hope, fell in love like a boy, instead of being like a brother to her. However, in parallel with this, a feeling of jealousy and a desire already familiar to him appeared, and the desire to touch up the handsome face of the younger Uchiha. Or to do so that there are only two representatives left capable of reviving the once great clan of the Hidden Leaf Village. Yes, you're right, they look good together, Hatake said dryly, feeling how slowly the ground was disappearing from under his feet, because only recently he realized that he had fallen in love, and Naruto, as it turned out, had finally stopped loving him. Minato's stern voice echoed in the copy ninja's head. Sorry, Hokage-sama asked me to attend the meeting with the Kazekage as the second guard. He quickly said the first thing that came to mind, not wanting to say or listen to anything for another second, and immediately disappeared, leaving his perplexed friend alone with his questions. Naruto, surrounded by her teammates, stood near the entrance to the auditorium, looking around for familiar faces. However, these same faces themselves found the one they needed, and confirmation of this was the restrained sob of Sasuke and the loud exclamation of Ino, who was hanging on the guy of her dreams from the back. You're late, Sasuke! The blonde shouted loudly, squeezing the Uchiha in a tight embrace under the menacing gaze of Sakura, and annoyed the very object of these dubious caresses. Naru laughed to herself, for a second merging with the loud laughter of her tailed one, because the picture really turned out to be extremely comical. Outwardly, the kunoichi remained calm, understanding. They definitely don't need extra attention right now. I have not seen you for so long. Meanwhile, Yamanaka continued to squeal, while continuing to squeeze Sasuke, not paying any attention to the latter's resistance. The circus is about to begin! Kurama squeezed out through laughter, while the kunoichi, with difficulty keeping a straight face, watched as Haruno slowly approached this composition of two people with a clear desire to kill one of them. Actually, the girl would like to avoid this, so she was already preparing to stop her newfound friend, when she was suddenly stopped by the menacing growl of the Ninetales in her head. Just try to stop them, let them figure it out themselves, he said in a deep voice, causing the surprised blonde to literally freeze in place. But, the kunoichi began to say, when Sakura, instead of fists, extended an accusing finger towards her old friend. Get away from Sasuke, Ino pork! Haruno shouted, forgetting about all her doubts, fears, and embarrassment. Naru flinched at her shrill voice, noticing out of the corner of her eye that out of surprise, even Sasuke stopped frowning for just a second and looked at the pink-haired girl in surprise. Kurama, in the girl's head, exploded with a new fit of laughter, as if he knew that Sakura would not fight, preferring a more peaceful option. Only the crowd of genin from various hidden villages didn't care whether these two girls would fight, argue, or quarrel. All the eyes of those present were directed at them. Oh look, Sakura! Ignoring the looks of strangers, she continued to tell Ino with a caustic smile, as if Haruno had simply said hello to her. Your forehead is still just as scary, she added mockingly, continuing to hug Sasuke in the most brazen manner, who seemed to have entered the final stages of rage at the state of affairs. For a moment, a thought flashed through the blonde's head. Why did the Uchiha react more peacefully to her hug, obediently obeying her request? But just as quickly she disappeared, as her friend's tail, which was well known to her, sticking out in different directions, appeared on the horizon. Well, repeat what you said. Viciously Sakura hissed while Naru was lost in thought. Grab her, otherwise there will be a dump! Kurama responded mockingly, distracting the girl from contemplating someone she had not seen since graduation. Still, Kurama, like any good trickster, knew when to stop so that a prank, a joke or a banal girlish quarrel did not escalate into something that would lead to sabotage. Naruto, led by the words of her bijou, sharply blocked the path of her teammate, intercepting the girl walking towards the enemy with her fists a couple of centimeters from her rival, who was finally thrown off Sasuke's shoulders. Yamanaka imitated Sakura in a very mature way, seeing perfectly well that she was being held quite tightly. What, are you also focused on this exam? Shikamaru asked boredly, appearing behind his teammate just at the moment when Sakura began to break free with renewed vigor. Oh Shika! Automatically releasing Haruno from her hands, Naruto exclaimed joyfully. Sakura, having received the long-awaited freedom, swayed in surprise, trying to maintain her balance, and glared angrily at team number 10, because of which she found herself in such an embarrassing position. At least I didn't fall. Chuji, you're here too! Meanwhile, forgetting about everything in the world, the blonde blurted out, and completely ignoring the irritated looks of Sasuke and Sakura, rushed to hug her friends. Cheating on Kakashi again? The fox snorted ironically from the prompter's booth, placing special emphasis on the word again. However, he was completely ignored by the girl, who was enthusiastically examining her old friends for changes. In general, not much has changed about them. The future head of the Nara clan became noticeably taller, now towering almost a head above his friend, and acquired a pair of stylish hoop earrings sparkling in the sun. Akimichi has significantly increased in size and become much more self-confident. God, you will never change, Naru, having measured her, carefully examining her in Chuji. With a suspicious look, the brunette finally betrayed her, barely noticeably smiling at the girl. Yeah. The brown-haired man assented, handing his friend an open packet of chips, which he had previously been crunching rather appetizingly. Why should I change? Smiling broadly, she asked a rhetorical question, putting her hand into her pack. In the background, a quiet hiss continued to squabble between a couple of Sasuke's main fans from their stream. But this time the girls argued without any threats, doing it more like close friends, which they were. Our slimy old friend is coming soon! Kurama snorted sarcastically, sensing someone else's chakra, sparkling with curiosity. Yeah. There you are! Came from behind the crowd of Leaf Genin who graduated from the academy only this year, a loud voice familiar to all of them and Akamaru's energetic bark echoing it. As if on cue, everyone turned around, immediately meeting the eyes of the last team from their graduation, admitted to real tasks by their mentor. Well, it looks like everything is assembled, he continued to say, slowly approaching. Let him watch, don't mind. This time I won't let him fool us all. The girl grinned, this time not even trying to hide it, because the three genins slowly approaching them were the ones who, in the future and past, more than once saved her from the very inferno, covering her back. And at the academy, she and Kiba often played dirty tricks. What is noteworthy is that only a guy was caught in their pranks, without ever handing over the girl to the evil Irika. The tailed one growled with satisfaction at her statement, completely agreeing with her words. For neither the Ninetales nor his Jinchuriki had any desire to feel sorry for someone who tried to kill more than once or twice, hurt feelings and, as a result, deceived absolutely everyone. No matter how good the person's reasons may be. Hinata, a girl with whom no one from their class talked to, squeaked modestly, because she was too quiet and reserved. However, these qualities did not detract from her fighting abilities. Naru remembered well how this shy girl stood up to pain, when she herself was pinned to the ground by pipes and could not move. Dark blue short hair in the Heim style with bangs and strands framing a cute face, pale skin and the same as all members of the Hyuga clan, pale lavender eyes without a pupil Byakugan, made her incredibly pretty. The girl was dressed in a cream-colored fur jacket with a hood with a fire symbol on the back, dark blue pants, and shinobi sandals. The girl had a kunai pouch on a bandage on her right leg, and the protector of their village was tied around her neck. The second guy, Aburaim Shino, only restrainedly nodded to everyone, as always, not being very verbose. Quite tall for his age, he involuntarily aroused envy in the soul of Neru, who was absolutely always shorter than everyone else. With his own long, thick dark brown hair pulled up by the leaf village protector tied on his forehead, he looked even taller. And his eyes, always hidden by dark glasses, and his face, covered to the middle by the collar of a wide gray jacket, reliably hid his emotions from everyone, making the guy incredibly mysterious. "Yes. Are you here too?" Shika said without much interest, either asking or stating a fact. "I see. This means that all 9 newcomers were allowed to take the exam this year." The guy with the puppy on top of his head nodded to himself and grinned at something. "I wonder how many of us will give in, huh, Sasuke?" he said defiantly, as if he was looking for a fight. "Here you go!" The tailed one roared approvingly, as if impressed by his words. However, Naruto, who knows her bijou well, heard the mockery in these words too clearly. "Sits, fox face!" The girl responded with a chuckle, appreciating the irony, but noticing Sasuke's frowning, she brazenly winked at the guy and, with a slight movement, moving her bangs to the side, softly, playfully drawled, "We'll see you later, Kiba." "Exactly." The Uchiha chuckled, throwing a fleeting mocking glance at his childhood friend, clearly drawing an analogy with their last meeting during Irika's last lecture, since the guy's cheeks immediately turned red, and he himself stopped being so harsh and self-confident. "Hey, you there, behave yourself," the one who had been carefully watching their noisy company with a close gaze for several minutes finally spoke up. Naruto grinned to herself and, accompanied by the giggles of her bijou, slowly turned to look at the speaker, intending to give him a short and bright scolding, in the best traditions of Jiraiya, but froze in place. "But the fact that?" Gaara said gloomily, stepping forward a little. Behind him, his brother and sister were already towering as 2 menacing figures. Everyone, including Kabuto, suddenly fell silent, staring like sheep at the sand village jonen. Still, their defense looked extremely strange. And even threatening. Naruto could barely contain the laughter that got stuck in her throat when she looked at Yakushi, desperately jealous of Kurama, who, unconstrained by circumstances, neighed like a horse. And there was a reason. Kabuto, like a fish in an aquarium, looked at them incomprehensibly, trying to understand the madness going on around him, where enemies were protecting each other. The blonde, having mastered her emotions, under Kurama's hysterical neighing, meticulously examined their future problem. His night-black eyes, ash-colored hair tied in a ponytail, and round glasses made him quite attractive. But everything was spoiled by the expression on Yakushi's face, which even now was extremely difficult to read. "None of your business," the girl said gloomily and turned away under the astonished gaze of Orochimaru's assistant. "My name is Naruto Namikaze, and I will show everyone where the crayfish spend the winter." Addressing the entire audience, the girl shouted out all she could to the synchronized nods of her friends and the mocking applause of Kurama, and then looked warmly at the guy with red hair. "Gaara, I'm so glad you're here." The blonde already shouted joyfully and, under the stunned looks of the others, rushed to hug the guy, who, with an extremely awkward smile that looked more like the grin of a predator, returned the hug. Minato walked with a doomed look towards the main hall of the Hokage residence, where the important guest was supposed to arrive in less than half an hour. Actually, he realized that relations with the 4th Kazekage would not work out a very long time ago, because whatever one may say, after the war, where they were enemies, practically nothing changed. Back then it all started with constant skirmishes with small nations along the borders of the great shinobi villages. Protracted conflicts gradually flared up everywhere, and at a certain point they became not just local confrontations, but a real global war. It resulted in an unprecedented clash of attrition, in which, due to problems with military capabilities, all nations suffered. This forced young people who had just graduated from the academy to be sent to war, who served as a shield for those who could somehow influence the outcome. All this led to a huge loss in all countries, including Suna, which was mainly opposed to Konoha. However, the confrontation between the Hidden Leaf Village and the Hidden Sand Village began long before this bloody war, which claimed the lives of countless people. The cause of this hatred between the two villages was the White Fang of Leaf and the father of Minato's only surviving student. Tsukumo Hotaki was a famous and powerful Konoha ninja who earned fame that, at one time, even eclipsed that of the Leaf Sannin. He killed Elder Suna's child, Chio, and his wife, leaving their son orphaned and dishonoring her in the process. Only later he ended up no better than them, unable to withstand the pressure due to a failed mission that was extremely important for Konoha, Tsukumo with him. So, Minato did not get along with Raza, the Kazekage of the Hidden Sand Village, even during the meeting of the 5 Kage, when Naru was about 4 years old. Then things didn't come to a fight only thanks to the Reikage. Now, after almost 10 years of complete neutrality between Suna and Konoha, they were supposed to meet again for peace talks. And only God knew what they would lead to this time, since he did not want to endure, albeit veiled, but still attacks on Konoha from his side. So it turned out that the Chunin exam threatened to develop into a battle between two Kage, and then into another full-scale war. Minato was distracted from these gloomy thoughts by a gloomy shadow standing not far from the doors to the hall, where he was heading. Upon closer inspection, the shadow took on the shape of his student, propping up the door frame with a grim expression. He glared at the small vase with a hateful gaze as if it were his worst enemy, trying to either incinerate it or force it to move and shamefully capitulate. The blonde looked thoughtfully at the vase and returned his attention to Kakashi, who seemed to have not noticed his sensei's approach for the first time in his life. Therefore, reasonably deciding that approaching the former ANBU captain, whose thoughts were far from here, was not a good idea, he decided to simply shout out to him. "Kakashi!" Minato called the man. He shuddered and looked around incomprehensibly, looking at blonde hair and clear blue eyes, an exact copy of those that he desperately did not want to see now. But the work remained work, and the man in front of him was his immediate superior, who should never have known why his last student was in such a deplorable state. "What happened to you?" the blonde asked softly, slowly approaching him. "Hokage-sama." Having bowed decorously, the man immediately responded, mentally trying to come up with the most plausible reason for what was happening. Only Guy's words about the kiss of Naru and Sasuke came to mind, and before his eyes there was a picture of his sunny girl hugging the Uchiha, whom he saw during a mission in the Land of Waves. But the worst thing was that, without noticing, he began to consider this girl, who had become his whole world, eclipsing all of the darkness that reigned in his soul, as his own. Kakashi himself did not expect that he would be so infuriated by the information about Naruto's passion for the younger Uchiha. Because for the last 20 minutes he had been thoroughly and seriously considering options for eliminating the element that was interfering with him. He spoke haltingly, unable to find a worthy reason. However, she was not needed. I know, you're worried about my girl." Minato himself answered his own question, clearly accepting his silence somehow in his own way. Hotaki nodded hastily, and finally unsticking himself from the joint, prepared to accompany the Hokage into the hall. "There's no need to worry so much, knowing Naru well enough. It seems to me that we should be worried about Ibiki." He grinned, moving closer to Kakashi, and patted him on the shoulder soothingly. "To be honest, I'm a little out of place myself. She's grown up so quickly." "You are right, Hokage-sama." Lowering his head, the man quietly responded, putting into his words a completely different meaning than he did. "Oh, Minato, my boy." Hiruzen's creaky, but overly cheerful voice was heard from the side, attracting the attention of the men. "I knew that you two would worry about Naruto and not think about the upcoming meeting." The old man grinned, coming closer to them and smiled understandingly. "So go and drink something to calm your nerves, and I myself will deal with the race and settle all the issues with the elders." Passing by them, the third Hokage loudly announced, and without listening to any objections walked into the hall where those who were supposed to greet the Kage of the Hidden Sand Village had already gathered. "Hey, is she crazy?" Ino asked Sakura in a half-whisper, pointing her finger towards the blonde, who was enthusiastically explaining something to a strange red-haired guy from the village of Sand. Haruno, having finally forgotten about the argument with Yamanaka, simply ignored her friend's words. At that moment, what worried her was not Naruto, who was talking with their rival. For after the arrogant statement of her teammate, their small group was literally pierced with glances from everyone, including compatriots who had graduated from the academy years earlier. And if earlier, when they quarreled with Ino, the genin looked at them with mocking curiosity, expecting a fight, now they looked at the insolent youngsters with obvious hatred and contempt. However, Sasuke, apparently the only one of all, clearly liked the mood of his childhood friend. The same could not be said about a friendly conversation with a guy practically unknown to him from another village. I heard your father also came to the village. Meanwhile, the blonde said, trying to test the waters, while stoically ignoring the disapproving glances of her friends and promising a slow and painful death everyone else. Gaara, unlike her, remained calm as a rock, and not only outwardly. It seemed that he simply did not notice these glances, as if such things were the norm. Although, given the attitude of the entire village and even his own family towards him, most likely this was the case. But according to the kunoichi, this was definitely not the norm. For the blonde, having herself been in such a situation in her past life and having endured more than one insult and humiliation in List's native village, understood what such feelings did to a person. She, unlike Gaara, who had come to terms with this, always reacted too sharply to this and each time splashed out her indignation in another mischief, since this burning resentment, pain and misunderstanding literally destroyed her soul, forcing her to hate everything and everyone around her. The guy seemed to have come to terms with the fact that for everyone around him he was a terrible monster, at some point beginning to consider himself one in reality. That's why I hate people, Naru, the tailed one said gloomily, seeming to be thinking about the same thing as his Jinchuriki. These pathetic little people use us. From childhood they grow not people, but weapons, and without realizing it, they create another monster, at the same time attributing everything to the Biju inside them. The Nine Tails snorted in annoyance, which was completely out of character for him, immediately disappearing somewhere deep inside her consciousness. Yes, but we traveled separately, the guy nodded peacefully, without showing even a drop of aggression when mentioning the one who crippled his life, without taking his eyes off the one who, the only one in the whole world, accepted him as a person and gave him such desired moments of peace and warmth. Strange, but the pressure of the one-tailed chakra weakened significantly after meeting this girl, which allowed him to rest at least a little. This, coupled with her cheerful character, strength and attitude towards life, made him not only accept the girl as his equal, but in some way admire her enthusiasm. Suddenly, there was a sudden movement in the crowd surrounding them, and then a strangely dressed man with a sound symbol on his protector appeared right in front of the speakers, whose name Naru could not remember. Most of his face was covered with bandages, leaving only his left eye, which was a dull color, exposed. A large cloak with long, wide sleeves completely hid the man's hunched figure, and a scarf with a snake pattern and a large amplifier on his right hand greatly alerted both the blonde and the guy next to her. Simultaneously with these actions, two other genin from his village, a boy and a girl, attacked Naruto's friends, blocking their path, literally distracting her for a moment from the man who appeared in front of her. It was this delay that the shinobi of the Hidden Sound village took advantage of. Literally in a second, he pulled the sleeve of the cloak off the amplifier and, under the menacing roar of the tailed one, swung his hand and struck the frozen kunoichi with force, who simply did not have time to react to this attack. Naru, closing her eyes, prepared to receive a direct blow accompanied by a sound wave that affected the senses, and to go for a long time to visit her tailed tenant, who was now desperately swearing due to his inattention. She remembered all too well what exactly this attack did to a person. Severe pain, disorientation, dizziness, nausea, and even complete paralysis. Actually, it's not worth saying that the blonde never wanted to experience this vile attack on herself. But time passed, and the man's powerful blows still did not overtake her, giving a faint hope that this time everything would work out without injuries. Finally, open your eyes, The tailed one drawled ironically, the first to collect himself, wanting to understand why there was not only a blow, but also no recoil from the glove with sound waves. Naruto, mentally snapping, carefully opened one eye, only to stare in disbelief a second later at the impressive wall of sand. Gaara protected her from the attack. The blonde blinked in disbelief and turned to look at the guy standing next to her, and she wished she hadn't done that. Anger literally enveloped the guy, forcing even her, who fought him tooth and nail, to shudder with fear. I think the first stage of rapprochement with this little psycho was successful, Kurama said apathetically, seemingly not believing that something like that had happened. Agree, slowly coming to her senses, the kunoichi responded, in shock, forgetting to even correct the bijou friend who had insulted her, and tried to stretch her lips into a smile. Thank you? She mumbled confusedly, carefully placing her palm on the guy's outstretched hand. He nodded, twitching strangely, while slowly removing the wall of sand separating him from the genin of the Sound Village. Pull yourself together and stop cheating on your fiancé with other men! The tailed one drawled sarcastically, seeming to have completely recovered from the shock, while at the same time feeling Naruto's chakra slowly enveloping the enraged guy. And somewhere in the back of his mind he heard the restrained chuckle of the one-tailed creature, with whom he had a mutual dislike since the days of Hagoromo. Yes, you are right, said the girl, for the first time deliberately ignoring the words of the tailed one about her betrayal, gradually beginning to hear lamentations and groans from her former classmates somewhere behind her. Naruto, imperceptibly exhaling all the air from her lungs in order to come to her senses, sharply pulled her palm off the frozen guy's hand and looked at the barrier with curiosity. How cool! She announced in her usual, ringing and cheerful voice, not paying attention to the silence that reigned, looked behind him, assessing the damage caused by the attack intended for her, and whistled. Yes, you are strong! The kunoichi extended her approval, assessing what would have happened to her if this blow had hit the target. However, the stunned face of the genin from the Village of Sound was also impressive. My pleasure, Gaara finally froze, answered dryly, removing the barrier with a smooth gesture. The girl frowned, realizing that he was very dissatisfied with something, just what? But she was unable to finish her thought, because the examiner and observers appeared near the board in a cloud of white smoke. So, everyone fell silent. A menacing male voice rang out throughout the audience, causing everyone to swallow in fear and stand at attention. Good afternoon, the man said a little more calmly when the smoke finally cleared, revealing to the examinees a formidable shinobi with 2 deep scars on his face and a complete absence of any emotions and about 15 ninjas standing behind him with a frown. Hi, Marino Ibiki, examiner for the first qualifying round of this exam, the man said meanwhile, scanning the genin with his gaze. Naruto Namikaze. And again in the thick of things? He chuckled somehow doomedly, stumbling upon a blonde head standing not far from the entrance, looking at him with an innocent smile. Hey you, from the Village of Sound, don't be arrogant, Ibiki immediately said sternly, pointing his finger at the leader of the team that attacked the girl. Did you want to go out the door? He said ironically, noticing their irritated look. God, he still makes me panic! The kunoichi squeaked, taking advantage of the fact that the man turned away, and exhaled. Because you! Kurama chuckled as the Sound Village genin apologized for their behavior. Let me clarify this situation. Moreno grinned meanwhile, who didn't care about everything these people told him. Fighting without the examiner's permission is prohibited. And even if permission is received, it is prohibited to kill the enemy, he said in such a tone that most of the genin's hearts shook. But the representatives of the Village of Sound only snorted at the man's words. However, they did this unnoticed by him. Those who disobey can consider themselves to have failed. Is everything clear? He asked a little more sternly, watching everyone nod slowly. Naruto, noticing that Ibiki's attention was no longer confined to the back rows, quietly thanked Gaara again and sidled her way towards her team. They stood motionless, listening carefully to the rules and procedure of the exam. The blonde, finding herself next to her teammates, without listening to Ibiki's words, pulled out from her bosom a pair of small wooden pendants on a thin cord, which for the last couple of days, with a fanatical sparkle in her eyes. She had been grinding and applying patterns in her room. To all her father's questions, the blonde mysteriously said that he himself would soon understand everything. Actually, these pendants were an exact copy of the one that the kunoichi herself had been wearing for a couple of months, differing only in a couple of symbols, and they were intended for a mental connection between the people wearing them. Something like a mini walkie-talkie, but information could be transmitted only by the power of thought, which was incredibly convenient in this situation. Naruto noticed this seal in her mother's notes when she was still studying at the Shinobi Academy. Then she immediately remembered this damn exam and decided that, when necessary, she would definitely do something similar for herself, Sasuke, and Sakura. However, she succeeded only partially, because, as it turned out, this seal worked exclusively with the chakra of scarlet-haired demons. Therefore, by adding a couple of extra symbols, she made her pendant something like a communicator that transmits and broadcasts thoughts to people wearing similar jewelry. The pendants of Uchiha and Haruno served only as guides. But still, it was many times better than a complete lack of communication. "Take it," Naru said, thrusting the decoration into the hands of her teammates on the verge of hearing, attracting their attention. "This will help us during delivery." She snorted when she noticed the questioning and disbelieving looks of her friends. They simultaneously lowered their gaze to their palms, examining rather simple little rectangles with strange patterns carved into them, painted over with black ink. "Then do good." "And I told you." Kurama snorted ironically, seeing through the eyes of his Jinchuriki the incredulous glances of her teammates, while somewhere in the background Ibiki was talking about the lot. "Oh, come on, they'll still do as I said," the kunoichi responded in a mocking tone. And, in confirmation of her words, to the snort of the nine tails, Sasuke shrugged and put the pendant on his neck. Noticing this, Sakura repeated his action, before once again looking at Naruto in disbelief. "Then we will distribute options." Meanwhile, Marino finished his speech, nodding towards Kotetsu, holding a thick stack of sheets in his hands. The entire audience perked up at once, discussing in a quiet whisper that the first stage would be a written test to test their knowledge. Haruno looked at Naru uncertainly, because at the academy this girl was consistently at the bottom of all academic lists, always failing written tests. But contrary to her opinion, Sasuke and Naruto herself looked quite confident, as if they were both confident that all members of their team would pass the exam with the highest score. The genin, finally falling silent under Ibiki's stern gaze, slowly moved towards the teacher's table, reluctantly exchanging their permits for cubes with the number of the place where they were to sit. Somewhere in the distance, the bright red top of Gaara's head flashed, who in some unknown way ended up almost at the beginning of this long line. Team number 7 found itself almost at the end, slowly moving forward between the rows gradually filled with genin from different countries. In general, everything went quite peacefully and orderly, until it was finally the Hokage's daughter's turn. "Good afternoon, Ibiki-sensei." The blonde sang cheerfully and friendly, finding herself opposite the man, once again attracting absolutely all attention to herself. Still, whatever one may say, they have already attracted a ton of attention, so the kunoichi decided, why not have at least a little fun at the expense of the one who today drinks the blood of the green used to his fill? "I hope you won't lower my grades because of that time," the girl said slyly, giving her permission into the hands of a man with scars. After which he shuddered strangely and frowned, scanning with his eyes the sweet, innocent girl with an angelic face, as if she were a serial killer caught in yet another crime. "God, he still remembers how you literally blew his mind with your questions and suggestions." Kurama exploded with laughter in the girl's skull, considering that day one of the best in their new life. "Well, forget how I spent the whole day in the interrogation department under his supervision, it's simply impossible." The kunoichi laughed to herself, remembering how her father, because of an urgent meeting, asked him to look after his daughter, because her nanny Kakashi was on a mission, and Marino was the only free person nearby. Then she had a lot of fun, bringing almost the entire Konoha torture and interrogation department to a nervous tick. But the funniest thing was that after a short conversation with her, one of the prisoners awaiting interrogation simply laid out everything he knew and requested asylum in a shinobi prison. Who do you think I am, girl? Ibiki said with a frown, gesturing towards her bag of cubes. For a person, Ibiki-sensei, for a person. The blonde laughed, putting her hand into the almost empty bag. By the way, will you take me to practice if I pass this exam? Having fished out a small white cube, she asked, batting her eyes cutely, feeling with her skin the increasingly growing interest of those around them in their conversation. No! The man answered too hastily, under the laughing gaze of the girl opposite. Oh! Damn thing! Kurama neighed in the blonde's head, starting to pound the surface of the water with his fists, stirring up the entire inner world of his Jinchuriki. I know, fox face. The kunoichi grinned and, shrugging her shoulders, went to the place indicated on the cube, which turned out to be in the second row, directly opposite Marino. Kakashi was sitting in the Hokage's office and, together with Minato, drank some pretty good, but too strong and tart wine. Actually, the jonen originally thought that they would drink a soothing tincture or green tea, although the latter, performed by his sensei, was more like a tranquilizer, knocking out the strongest fighter with one gulp, but not alcohol. But Minato understood Hiruzen's words in his own way and, taking a bottle and a couple of deep cups from the hiding place of his predecessor as Hokage, confronted Kakashi with the fact of forced drinking. The wine, as it turned out a little later, did not have the same effect on the sensei and his student as originally expected, and instead of being distracted and relaxed, they both plunged into the very abyss of their hidden fears. Because of this, the silence that reigned in the office literally rang with tension, but neither one nor the other noticed this, replaying in circles in their heads what was gnawing at them so much from the inside. It seemed that a little more, and one of them would become a nuke-nin who killed his student, and the second would simply go out the window. I miss her so much, Kakashi Minato finally spoke, diffusing the silence with his quiet velvety voice, and knocking over an unknown number of cups with the tart drink, which turned out to be many times stronger than ordinary wine. He smiled sadly, continuing to drill into the opposite wall, attracting all the students' attention. Kushina took half of my heart with her, leaving me all alone with all this burden, he drawled tensely, raising his drunken gaze at the same gloomy copy ninja, who was now thinking about something completely different. He looked with an unfocused gaze at his sensei, who had aged 10 years in a couple of seconds, and smiled sadly at him, remembering the times when he was his student, and Minato seemed to him an incredibly strong and confident shinobi. If she were alive, she would definitely give you a tasty slap on the head, Minato-sensei. Unexpectedly for himself, Kakashi smiled warmly, remembering how hot-tempered Minato's wife was in moments of anger, not sparing punches and strong expressions. Kushina was the heart of his sensei. Anyone who knew these two at least a little knew, but only those closest knew that she was also the voice of reason of her husband, forcing him to go forward, despite the obstacles surrounding him, fears and the bitterness of losses. Kakashi was very aware of this. He remembered very well how his sensei experienced the death of his students. Probably even stronger than he did in his time, feeling only his own guilt in what happened, because, in Minato's opinion, he was the one who didn't train his team well enough. Kushina helped him get through it, then feeling, regain faith in yourself, cope with the burden on your heart, and move forward. But when she also died, there was no one to help the sensei except the newborn child. You're damn right, Kakashi. The man laughed in response, momentarily becoming the same as he was before. She would have taken my head off for such thoughts. However, after a moment the room again plunged into gloomy silence. I'm so glad Nara has you unexpectedly for Kakashi, Minato said quietly, looking somewhere to the side. The one who will never abandon her, and will always support her, guide her on the right path and protect her, he said in one breath, not seeing how the jonen's face darkened, his facial features sharpened, and the only visible eye filled with dull hatred for the whole world. Yes, Minato-sensei.